Hello and welcome. We are having a special panel reaction tonight to Dr. Hamp had a discussion with Dr. Solberg. He's actually had two in the past few months. We're going to be reviewing a portion of his first discussion. And so we have an amazing panel tonight. We are expecting several good brothers to join us for commentary and reaction. And we're excited to be doing this. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest tonight. This is Dr. Douglas Hamp. Hello, sir. Welcome. Oh, can't hear you. Check out your mic.
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Welcome.
Okay, good. There we go. Hey, I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Glad to have you, sir. And so we're going to be looking at your first discussion you had with Dr. Solberg. And I pulled out about 18 minutes of a kind of a meaty little segment there where you guys are going back and forth on some big topics. So it'll give us a lot to discuss. So I'm happy to have you on. And in addition, we have our brother, Matthew Jansen, is going to be joining us tonight for commentary.
Hey, shalom, Brother Sean. And it's good to meet you, Dr. Hamp. I enjoyed listening to you and Rob go over the dietary laws on the second video. The first one I haven't had a chance to watch, but I look forward to it. I appreciate you laboring the kingdom, brother.
Thank you.
All right. And we also have Nedrick from Nazarene Remnant, also called Oblias. So welcome, brother.
Shalom, shalom. God bless. Good to be here. Nice to meet you, Dr. Hamp.
You too.
And last but definitely not least is our brother Will from Milwaukee. Yes, that is Milwaukee Power Tools. Shout out.
Yes, hey, shalom. Save the best for last, Sean. Hey, what's up, Dr. Ham? Good to see you again, brother.
You too, Will. Yeah.
All right. And so all of us, I thought this would be a good panel. All of us have spent many years studying God's word, specifically God's instructions for wisdom called the Torah. And that was kind of the underpinning of this discussion that Dr. Hamp had with Dr. Solberg. And they went into some places that were different than my initial discussion with Dr. Solberg. So I was happy to see it, and so I think there's a lot to discuss and review. Does anyone have any commentary or questions before we get started?
Yeah, I actually have one real quick. Dr. Ham, can you tell us, how did this get started? Like, who initiated who? Was it on common ground? What were some of the, because I know Brother Matthew here, he also had a conversation with Solberg, but there were also some guidelines, I'll say. Say guidelines kind of previously. So yeah, what started that?
Well, when Solberg had his list that he was putting together about looking, trying to figure out where Messianic Hebrew roots kind of people are, and that went down, like a lead balloon. And so I just reached out to him because I had a feeling he wasn't trying to do anything terrible. I thought, let's just talk, let's not have a debate. Let's just see if we can have a conversation and see where we go. And I've done lots of debates in my life, and I find that there's rarely a winner because each side gets more entrenched, and we simply, we hear what we want to hear. And I thought, I just want to hear this guy. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I actually met him in the Denver airport. He was flying back, and I was flying out to Nashville to go do a thing with Blurry Creatures this back in May. And, seems like a nice guy. Obviously, we see things differently, but, everyone on this panel sees things differently, right? And I think this is where we have to be very careful that we don't demonize somebody that doesn't see the Bible the same way that we do, right? And yeah, so I thought, well, okay, we had a lot of fun on our first one. Let's do it again. And I really wanted to get into food, but we kept going back to identity. And, that's just how the conversation kind of has to go, I think, because that answers so much. If you can figure out your identity, then these other things take care of themselves. You don't have to even convince people, to eat hot dogs on the 4th of July if you're an American, right? It's just like, well, that's just who I am. And I think when people begin to understand that we are now part of Israel, that we've been grafted in, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. Amen.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, I have pulled out this clip here, and it's right as Dr. Hamp, you'd already spent a few minutes discussing, your understanding of the marriage covenant, and Rob offered a little pushback on that, but you hadn't really gotten into it yet. So this is where you guys start diverging. After a brief Sabbath discussion, you start diverging into Acts 10 discussion, and then furthering into covenant talk. So put this up
He
here.
was very much living within the spirit of the Sabbath. He says, hey, Sabbath wasn't, you're not made for it. It was made for you, right? And yet the Pharisees had put all these little restrictions and rules and extra things all around it, and people could barely move, right? And it was taking all the fun out of it.
Yeah, they built the fence around the Torah, they called it.
Yeah, exactly. Until, your fence is like 1 foot by 1 foot, and you're just standing there like, I can barely move, right?
Well, pretty soon they're almost worshiping the fence,
Yeah.
rather
they
than
were.
God. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there were so many examples of this, of where, God had to kind of shake up the disciples. One of my favorite is in Acts 10, where, of course, Peter has the dream, the sheet comes down with all the unclean animals, and he says, right, Peter, kill and eat. And he says, no, Lord, I can't do that. Right. And so then he wakes up, there's a knock at the door. There's 3 dudes. Okay. So the sheet came down 3 times. There's 3 guys. And so he's thinking about this. What does this thing mean? The Spirit tells him, go with them. He goes to Cornelius's house. He's kind of blown away. He's like, what in the world's going on? Now, Cornelius is a Gentile. As a good Jewish man would not hang out with a Gentile. This is, and also you had both clean and unclean animals in that sheet. And so the clean animals touching the unclean animals would have made them unclean.
Yeah.
And so now Peter's thinking,
Okay, so I want to jump in real quick right there, because Dr. Hamp, is that you're going real quickly over the Acts 10 scenario. All right. So I know you're not doing like a breakdown.
right. Yeah.
But that is what the understanding was in first century Judea from the rabbis and the Pharisees, that, if this is a clean animal mixed with an unclean, it makes it impure.
Right.
But do any of you find that actually in the Torah?
No, I mean, it's not in the Torah at all. And that's why God had to shake Peter up, is that it's not in the Torah. Or had it been in the Torah, that'd be a totally different conversation. But there was this massive bias. We can call it, this is just racism, basically. There's not even a better word for it, I don't think. This is racism, where
Abrahamism.
And the first century Jews think that non-Jews are untouchables, and we can't really touch them or talk with them because we'll get their cooties. And so God's like, hey, Peter, I got a message for you, because I need you to go and talk to some of those unclean people. And that's why, it came down 3 times. There were 3 guys, etc.
Do you guys think that the Pharisaic interpretation of that came from Leviticus 11 or Leviticus 22, talking about if something unclean, that's a dead carcass, touches a vessel or something else, or if someone touches an unclean dead carcass, then they'll become unclean themselves?
It looks like when you read Leviticus 11 that something that is clean or something that is food can become contaminated by something unclean. And I think this is why we get the 2 words common or unclean in Acts 10, 12 through 16. Koinos is common, which is a word that, can be translated like community, fellowship, koinonia is related to in Greek, versus akathartos, which is unclean. But something I pointed out recently to somebody, and I saw years ago, was that I understand that the interpretation of the vision referred to people, Acts 10:28. Peter's very explicit on the interpretation. But when you look at the vision, the voice from heaven never told Peter to eat anything unclean. But it's conditioned in somebody's mind that that's what the voice said. But the voice just said, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And we forget there were clean and unclean animals in the sheet. Peter saw the clean animals to be common because they were next to the unclean animals. Exactly what Dr. Hamp said, quickly there and talking to Solberg. I don't know if he picked it up. But that's why the voice responds when Peter says, I've not eaten anything common or unclean, several years after Yeshua has went to heaven. The voice says, what God has made clean, don't call common. Not, I've turned the unclean to clean. The voice didn't say that. He said, but what I have made clean, don't call koinos, don't call common. And so Cornelius was a commoner. He wasn't a heathen, but he was a member of the Italian band. You know, he was an uncircumcised member of the nations, but he paid his alms. He prayed to God often. We know that he had to be righteous because if you turn your ear from hearing the law, your prayers are an abomination. Proverbs 28:9. That wasn't Cornelius. Cornelius didn't turn his ear from hearing the law.
Mhm.
He was probably a Sabbath keeper as a God-fearer. And he probably observed many of the laws in Judaism, but he wasn't physically circumcised. So, you know, they loved him at best. They had to love him at arm's length. They couldn't get too close to him. He's a commoner,
Mhm.
you know.
Well, it calls him devout, right? In the first
He
few
was
verses,
devout.
calls him
Yes.
devout.
Same word used of Ananias, you know, the
What-
one that baptized Shaul. So.
What's kind of funny and ironic to me is that Cornelius is portrayed with kind of more esteem than Peter in this particular chapter.
Mm.
Like Peter's having to get the life lesson taught to him from Cornelius, who gets the angelic vision and interaction, and like tells him, okay, now you're going to go see Peter, and
Mhm.
and even though Cornelius is being brought to Peter so he can learn about Christ, it's still Peter's being taught this incredible discipleship lesson as a result of this. You know,
Yeah.
to get away from this oral Torah, if you will, this kind of Pharisaic tradition of, oh, we can't associate with commoners. It's you can't eat with them. You know, like it says that Peter says, you know, it's unlawful for me to eat, you know, with the commoner or with the Gentile. But that's not Torah either.
Right.
And as you said, Dr. Hamp, that's not actual Torah. And I think as you were saying, the perception that Peter's wrong perception, as you're repeating that in this moment in the video, Dr. Hamp or Dr. Solberg's just shaking his head, because it seems to be this is what so many people who haven't studied this. They do take the oral Torah as the truth, and they don't know the cultural understanding there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's such a shame that people think that what the Pharisees were promoting, which a lot of it was oral Torah, is Old Testament. And I think that's where our Christian brothers could really learn a whole lot more, is that no, Jesus was against the traditions, and he wasn't wholesale against the oral Torah, but where the oral
Right.
Torah smacked into the actual Torah, then yes,
Right.
you know, when they crashed, then that was a real problem. Yeah. And you know, this whole thing with Peter is that Paul had to call him on the carpet later, right? You know, so there they are in Galatians 2. It says, when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For he regularly ate with the Gentiles before certain men came from James. However, when they came, he withdrew and separated himself because he feared those from the circumcision party, right? I mean, it's, you know, I mean, hey, God bless Peter. I get it, right? We all have our issues. And this was an issue that Peter just didn't understand it, even though he had that radical dream, vision, whatever. And God's like, hey, don't call common or unclean what I've called clean, and don't call any man common or unclean. Like, he got it then, but then he fell back into his old ways, and then Paul had to call him out on that.
Tradition dies hard, brothers. Tradition dies hard. I've had people get more upset at me for preaching against traditions of men than they get upset with me for preaching against sin. So tradition dies hard.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact about that Galatians 2 passage, it's actually the only place in the Bible where if you go into Greek, the word Judaizer is actually used, and it's used to refer to Peter when he listened to those from the party of the circumcision tell him not to eat with the Gentiles. So fun fact, they use that word Judaizer a lot. It's only mentioned one time in the text, in the Greek at least.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's used in that passage to refer to Peter when he's telling them.
That's interesting. Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that particular oral Torah is in the Mishnah under the term set table, to where they believe they taught that if you went and ate with a Gentile, even though if they were a convert, you could still become unclean because you don't know if they, you know, before they showed up to the dinner, if they were at the idol's temple, you know. So like they just assumed the worst of these Gentiles and just were like, if you're going to interact with them, you're going to get some cooties on you because they just probably came from the idol's temple. Don't even have a meal with them, you know, which is just absolutely against the spirit of the gospel.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
The 18 degrees say even a Gentile's home is unclean. So if you just go into a Gentile's home, you're already unclean. I got to do stuff for you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something I don't see in Leviticus or Deuteronomy 14 or none of this stuff when it talks about becoming unclean because you come in contact with something that
Right.
is an unclean animal or an unclean thing, or, someone that says seminal emission or something like that. It's not, those are natural occurrences in life. Something dies and therefore it's a carcass. Your family dies and you have to bury him, and these are not things that you're not just born unclean. It's like a Judaic version of Calvinism. Someone's just born unclean.
Yeah.
And that's unclean.
Instead of totally depraved, they're totally unclean.
Well, there was even teachings in the first century that the Gentiles were created to be just created for the fires of hell. I mean, that was one of the terrible teachings, and look, I will defend the Jews and the rabbis a lot. Okay. But they did have some bad teachings, clearly. And that's what God is trying to get Peter over, and I think it just, I think it really impresses upon us how quickly we can have right theologies and then we can have some wrong actions, and some of our theology can be right and some of it can be pretty wrong, right? And this is where Peter had been walking with the Lord for the whole ministry. He'd seen the miracles, he'd experienced all this stuff, but the moment Jesus said, okay, now I want you to go to non-Jews, Peter's like, what? Are you kidding? Like, I know you came for the Jewish people, but what are you talking about? Right? And it just did not register, even though, Jesus said to do it, but it did not register, go into all the nations and make disciples.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Right. And they're like, I think you just said go to all the Jews and make, it's like, no, I mean, all the nations, guys.
Jews in all the nations.
Yeah. There's a guy debated one time, and this many years ago, and he was trying to make that claim that, like in Second Peter, it says at the beginning of the intro that Peter's writing to those in the dispersion, and he's just only going. He even tried to claim that the Book of Romans was written to scattered northern tribe people, and like it's just the Jews in Rome, because he uses Acts 2 where it says even people from Rome came back for Pentecost. So it's kind of a very slanted view of evangelism to the nations from the Matthew 28 commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Hamp hit it on the head at the beginning when he mentioned racism. It was prejudice. I got halfway through an expository sermon series in the book of Galatians until I realized that the whole book of Galatians is about prejudice. It was about Jewish people thinking that Gentiles were either not equal to them or could not even have salvation simply due to them not being a Jew. And, we try to make it, and I understand there is some things about the law in the book of Galatians, but Galatians 3:28 is the hub of the book, that in Christ we are one or equal, and there is neither male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Greek, salvifically. Obviously, there's still men and women, but salvifically we're one in Christ, and that's if we belong to Christ, then we are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise, which goes back to what the brother said. We're grafted into the tree, not a separate tree, but grafted into the natural tree. So
yeah, and like I'm glad you said that, Matthew, because as I've re-examined Paul's writings, I've realized that the book of Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, it's Paul trying to explain how basically the two sticks are coming back together. How you can have Jews, which again, with this whole idea that Peter's given us, that Jews can't hang out with non-Jews, and this was like a mind bender back then. What do you mean Gentiles can come into covenant relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob without becoming a Jew? How in the world is that possible? I mean, we just take it for granted, but back then this was mind blowing, and so Paul is just giving all these different examples, and he's showing from the Torah, from the prophets, he's showing every which way how this was the fulfillment of prophecy, how this is the house of Israel and the house of Judah coming back together. And I am convinced that because we have, by and large, forgotten about this distinction between the house of Israel and the house of Judah, we don't get it. And I was trying to explain that in the little discussion I had with Solberg, is that, I remember reading about the division of the kingdom. I mean, I knew that historically, but theologically, I had no idea what that meant. I really didn't. I knew it happened. I'm like, okay, that happened. So what? Right? Like, that's too bad. That's a real bummer. But if you'd ask me, okay, what is the theological significance of that? I'd be like, I don't know. And how is God going to bring them back together? What? Like, I would have just been like, I don't know what you're talking about, but once I finally saw it, I remember it was years ago. I was riding my bike back and forth to work, and I was listening to the book of Ezekiel, and I kept hearing House of Judah. I'm like, okay, that's the Jews. And the House of Israel. I'm like, wait, is that the Jews? And I'm like, this is strange. Like, who? Okay, but what do you mean you're going to bring the House of Israel back together? Because I thought the Jews or Israel and Israel are the Jews. So what do you mean that you're going to bring them back together? And that's where I think the church has, by and large, missed it, is that because they have not maintained the distinction between these two, they can't see the need for the fix, right? They don't see the problem. And only when you understand the problem can you understand the solution. But Paul has been giving the solution, and most Christians, the average Christian and average pastor out there, doesn't have any clue about the problem. They don't understand how these two were disconnected, and the prophecy was to bring them back together. That's what is missing in much of our theology.
I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. I think too, a lot of people don't even know what a Jew is. Like, I hear so much that, like in the Torah, I know you guys probably have too, where like the law was given to the Jews, like in Exodus. It's like, no, that's not what a Jew is. And you try to talk to them, it's like, well, a Jew is then from the tribe of Judah. That's someone. I'm like, okay, well then, what about Paul? Paul's a Jew, but he's not from Judah. So how do you explain that? And Dr. Hamp, you explaining the 10 tribe kingdom, the northern, and then you had the southern, the 2 tribe, and that's even called, the 10 tribe is the disobedient kingdom. And they are, in Amos 9, it talks about they are dispersed among the nations. They're sifted as one sifts the bread. But then in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23 or 26, where it's like the 10 people from the nations will grab the corner of a Jew and say, we see that coming together. How you mentioned even earlier, the 2 sticks coming together. It's all parallel.
Yeah.
So when you understand that we are Israel, we are that long lost, and we're going, we're grabbing the corner of the Jew, right? Like even Psalms 119, they have that light. We follow that light, like one of my favorite movies, David, right? Follow the light, that whole song, right? They have this. So follow it. Right. But when you don't understand who the Jews are, who Israel is, it gets confusing. I've tried to talk to Christian pastors about this, and it keeps going back to, but I'm a Gentile. I'm like, right, but we're grafted in, brother. We're grafted in.
Yeah.
But you're putting me back under the law. I have to go sacrifice animals in my backyard.
Yeah.
It's a struggle, but yeah.
It is. And I keep searching for words to how can I explain this to people? I'm trying every which way to explain it. And I even got Solberg. I mean, he, of his own free will, he admitted that we are part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And I'm like, yes. He's like, but that I don't have to keep the law of Moses. I'm like, oh my goodness, dude. And this is where we just keep dancing around this thing endlessly. And I mean, if I could find some magic bullet to get this into their heads, I don't know. I wish I could show them. I'm like, guys, the law of Moses is God's law. First of all, it's pretty good. Okay. It wasn't bad. And now that I'm part of Israel, guess what? Then I need to do things that God told Israel to do. Right. I mean, it just makes so much sense. But we've had, almost roughly 2,000 years of conditioning of the whole Marcionistic interpretation and twisting of Paul, that it's really hard to untwist him. It's hard to just read Paul without those Marcionistic glasses, because it doesn't sound right. It's not what they've heard in church. I can't tell you how many sermons, that Marcion would be very proud of concerning the Apostle Paul that I have heard in my life. When I first really started digging into Marcion, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've heard this guy. I've heard this in probably 20 to 30 sermons at least. I mean, I'm probably being very conservative. I've probably heard 100 sermons that are using the same thing. The law was nailed to the cross and we're now free. We're not under the law. And until we can, help our brothers to have that paradigm shift, we're going to keep circling around this same discussion.
Have you guys have all heard that song, like My Father's House? It's a big house with lots of room and everything like that.
Yeah.
If you guys were to come to my house, like I have rules. Respectfully, my wife keeps my house super clean. When you come in, please take your shoes off, and we're gonna pray before we eat. Right? There's rules, and I expect if you guys come into my house, to follow. And I think the same way that God has called us, or we become adopted children, well, there's rules to my Father's house, that we should keep. Like
Revelation 22:14.
Yeah, amen.
To get into the city and eat the tree of life, you got to keep the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, what's so ironic about this is if you did ask the pastor, okay, pastor, you say you're using this terminology that we're going to put back under law. If I suggest that we should take the Old Testament seriously and apply what applies to us, then are you saying that now it's okay for me to go and cheat someone, or it's okay for me to go and take your wife as mine now? Is that the idea? Like what level of lawlessness are you okay with here? Because if we're just talking Sabbath, dietary, and festivals, that's a discussion we can have, but we can't just throw them all into this blanket term like we're not under the law anymore, because then what you're saying, you're not under instruction by God anymore. What are you talking about? It just gets semantics at some point, and it kind of breaks down in the conversation. So what I thought was interesting is you mentioned the sheet with the Peter's response to the sheet that's coming down in Acts 10 was that there was it doesn't specify which animals are on there, just saying that there's 4-footed animals, creeping things, and the birds of the air. And Peter's response is, I've never eaten anything common or unclean, right? Mm-hmm. So it's assumed, and I think I like Matthew's interpretation there, where there were both clean and unclean animals on the sheet, and according to the oral Torah, that made the unclean animals, by their man-made tradition, made the unclean animal or the clean animals unclean also, in a sense. And so, and that was part of the metaphor for the new converts, right? To not view them as unclean. And I think it's fascinating because, like, when I go back and I'm looking through the law and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Didn't at Paul's trial, didn't they accuse him of defiling the temple? Why did you guys remember why they accused him of defiling the temple?
They thought he had brought a Greek in there, right? In Acts 21. Remember?
Are we to assume that the 4 men's vows he went to pay for were converts who were Greeks? That's just the deduction I put together. But then I think to myself, okay, because the text in Acts 21 through 24 doesn't explicitly say the 4 men that he took were all Greeks, but then that's the claim made of him, right? And they arrested him at the temple. And then I also think, but wait a minute, they didn't arrest Jesus in his triumphal entry after he just gets off the donkey, an unclean animal, and then ministers in the temple. Like, why didn't he defile the temple, right? So it's kind of like this weird. It almost reminds me of like how corrupt cops today will use the law against you. They will enforce what they didn't want to enforce, right? And and it's like the oral Torah was their burden that no one could bear, right? If they didn't like you, they can enforce it on you. You know? Interesting stuff, but we'll get back to it.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, well, he was thinking just like an average Jew back then, is that we can't hang out with those dirty, unclean Gentiles because they're nasty, right? And so then by verse 28, he's like, oh, I get it. God has shown me not to call any man common or unclean, right? But then, you think, okay, he got the message, right? Great. But then later, when he's in Antioch, Paul has to call him on the carpet because Peter was being the hypocrite. When there were no Jews around, he would hang out with the Gentile Christians. But then when the Jews came from Jerusalem, he suddenly was like, I don't know you guys. And Paul calls him out for his hypocrisy, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's so funny. There's so many things like that where.
Well, Peter for me is huge because he reminds me of myself sometimes. Like, how many times do you have to teach me this, Lord? And then again, he'll do the same thing later on.
Right.
I think what we have though is in that time period, which I think is so fascinating, is you have this liminal state between the old and the new covenants. And you have Jews who have been not just for their lives, but their parents and their grandparents going back 15 centuries at least to the giving of the law had lived that way. So it's certainly going to be hard for them to understand, oh, I guess those food restrictions aren't required of everybody anymore. of all God's people, of God's covenant people, right? So
Yeah.
I can understand why Peter would kind of waffle a little bit, go back and forth, just the same way he denied Jesus 3 times, right?
Yeah.
And so I
Do you
think we
think it
see
was
that
about
pattern.
food in Acts 10? Do you think that was about food or about people?
Well, so here's what's interesting. I think if you look at how the Torah links the two,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was about both. In other words, I think Jesus used the fact that food is now clean to teach Peter that he can now interact with the Gentiles, because the Torah doesn't prohibit Jews from hanging out with Gentiles. There's no such law.
True. Yes.
What happens, though, is those food restrictions, the Torah's dietary restrictions, effectively created a social barrier. Because if you wanted to be a good, faithful Jew, you wouldn't go to a Gentile house to eat, because who knows what they're going to serve you. Even if they say, I'm going to serve you a salad, right? Totally kosher salad. You don't know what the plates have touched. And so there's this concern about ritual impurity when you're, like the vision shows, a clean and an unclean thing touch each other, come into contact. And the big thing for me, too, is that Jesus.
Okay, what do you guys think about that?
So I think he's kind of getting more into Mishnah ruling, right? I for me personally, one of my favorite verses, 1 Corinthians 15:33, bad association spoils good habits, right? A lot of the people of the nations, a lot of Gentiles, they were unfamiliar with the Torah, right? They were unfamiliar with God's law. So, they acted in certain ways. They had different customs that, and a lot of it I feel like would have gone against God's laws. So I feel like it's more of like the safety net of being cautious. But for him to still hold on to this idea that it's literally about food, all throughout the Tanakh, we see so many comparisons of people to animals. We see this with Daniel's vision. A lot of the sources, even from the Talmud and Midrash, reference swine to the Romans and everything like that. There's a lot of comparisons there, but for him to still believe it has something to literally do with the food is just it's very weird to me, because Dr. Hamp, you brought this up. Peter has the vision, he's confused about it, hangs out with Cornelius. Now I understand the vision. This is what it means. And he explains it. He doesn't say, oh, and we're also allowed to eat whatever we want, clean or unclean, if it's touching, whatever. He says, now I know what it means. He explains the vision. What is still over, what scales are still over Solberg's eyes? And I mean that respectfully. It's just
Peter,
I
don't get it.
Peter repeats himself, right, in the next chapter 11.
Yes.
Back to the other disciples, re-explaining what happened, and so he has the same conclusion there as well.
And they come to that conclusion. Right?
That's right. That's right.
He doesn't even say his conclusion, but the men of Jerusalem say, "Oh, we get it. God has granted repentance even unto life, even unto the Gentiles." So
Right.
not only does Peter understand it, the men of Jerusalem understand it, but then yet somehow us in all our wisdom, 2,000 years later, figure out, no, God, you were talking about food.
Solberg makes the point that the dietary regulations separated Israel from the nations, but that's what the entire Torah did. All of the Torah made Israel set apart from the nations. Deuteronomy 4:5-7 says they were to be a light, so that when outsiders looked at them obeying the law, the outsiders would say, wow, you've got a wise, mighty one, and you've got good instruction. We want to be part of your people. And so a lot of them would convert, become part of Israel, and they would abide by the Torah. But it's just odd to me that he would say, well, diet would put this barrier between Israel and the nations, but the entire Torah did, the entire law. I mean, the outsiders were heathen peoples doing all kind of heathen practices. What is it? Leviticus 18 at the end, the chapter is dedicated to prohibitions against sexual immorality. And at the end of Leviticus 18, he says, I've driven, or I'm going to drive out the nations of Canaan because they practice these abominations. So there we have other practices that separated Israel from the nations. Israel were a sexually moral people. The Canaanites were a sexually immoral people. So you don't take the Torah away and say, all right, now there's no more barrier. No, what you do is you obey and you shine that light, city set on a hill, like Yeshua says in Matthew 5, hoping that people from the outside will come to the inside.
And see your good works and glorify God in heaven.
Yeah.
And that's what Acts 15 is all about. You know, it has to do with idolatry, right? So the 4 prohibitions for a new convert. Like I hear people say, "Oh, that's the only thing that they have to do." Is stay away from idolatry, from things strangled, from blood, and from porneia, from prostitution or temple prostitution, as it were. Sometimes translated sexual morality. But it's saying, look, you're now coming to a relationship with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You clearly can't be going to the pagan temple anymore, okay? Mm-hmm. And the things that are mentioned in Acts 15 are specifically things that were happening in a pagan temple. Obviously, idolatry, the strangling of animals and the drinking of blood, that was related to idolatry. And then you had temple prostitution. That's why God got so upset with the children of Israel in their little escapade with the Moabites and the women, is because they were worshiping the god Baal Peor. And God's like, like I have a lot of grace, but this is where I draw the line, because you and I are supposed to be a thing, right? And we're supposed to be true to each other and faithful. Right. And you're off on having this fling with somebody else. That's a bridge too far. And so I've even had people tell me, this is years ago, I was at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and in California. And I had been reading about blood pudding, and I'm like, how disgusting is that? And I'm like, as Christians, we shouldn't be doing that, right? Because we're not supposed to drink blood. And this pastor, he turns around, he looks at me. He was mad. He was red. He's like, that was a transitional period, and we are allowed to do anything because we have freedom in Christ. And I'm just like, whoa, I thought he was going to hit me or something, because he was so adamant that we have freedom in Christ. And that was a transitional period, the book of Acts. And we don't have to do any of that stuff. And I'm like, but this is the book of Acts. I'm like, dude, this is the book of Acts. Like, this is the apostles telling us not to do these things. It's not even Old Testament. It's specifically the apostles telling us. But even that didn't count, because it's a transitional period. And you heard Solberg say it's a liminal period, so it's a transitional period is what he's saying. And so because it's a transitional period, the book of Acts doesn't really apply to us for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. We're kind of we're saying goodbye to old covenant. We're kind of entering into this new covenant, which, if people are honest, what they really mean is we're just getting into the Marcionistic understanding of how all this comes together. And, that is where
and Marcion believed the Old Testament God was different, and Jesus had to save us from him.
Yep.
And that was that the two covenants were not anything alike. And this is while I don't agree with everything Irenaeus says, this is something he was, in my opinion, he was correct on refuting. Yeah. That he said that anyone who believes that doesn't know the truth, and they don't know the scriptures.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Marcion was rabidly anti-Jewish, anti-Sabbath, anti-Torah. He said the God of the Old Testament was this demiurge God who foisted the Jews and the law at the backs of the Jews. And Jesus came to save us from all that stuff. And that's the basic message that evangelicalism and much of Western Christianity, for a large part, has basically been preaching. And it's really a shame, because clearly that's not what, that's not wrong. That's not correct. And, then we have some people within the Hebrew Roots Torah keeping community that they start throwing Paul under the bus and like, oh, he's fake. I debated a guy back in 2020, this guy named Laverne, and he was all against Paul, and he couldn't understand how I could actually be a Torah keeper and still like Paul. I'm like, because Paul's been misunderstood. Yeah. I feel bad for Paul. I think Paul was probably spitting in his grave every other day. He's just like, oh my gosh, I didn't say that. But because we've accepted the Marcionistic interpretation of Paul, there's these two guys that met around the 5th century AD. At the Tigris River, One was named Barabbas, the other one was named Joseph. And one is asking the other, he's like, are you a Christian or a Jew? And he's like, I'm a Christian and a Jew. And the guy's like, wait, how can you be both? That's impossible. And then the other guy's like, well, no, I'm Jewish. Okay, I was born Jewish, and I believe in Messiah. And he's like, oh, I get it. Because what was happening is the term Christian had been usurped by the Marcionites. And when they said Christian, they really meant I'm a Marcionite. It'd be like if the Mormons had basically stolen the term, and then that's what a Christian is basically a Mormon. And that's what was happening back then. And so this doctrine of Marcion has basically infiltrated the church. Many well-meaning Christians who love Jesus and all that stuff, but they have a version of Paul and the New Testament that is very much in the spirit of Marcion. And that's what's hard, because this is a real paradigm shift for people. They've got their glasses on, Marcion glasses, and until we can pry those off their face, they're not going to see what we're talking about. We can keep pointing to the text and say, it's right here. Peter says, don't call any man common or unclean. And they're like, yeah, that's about food. You're like, no. Peter just said, God just showed me not to call any man common or unclean. Yeah, that's talking about food. I'm like, oh my goodness, dude. No.
Peter even quotes Leviticus 19 and says we're to be holy as God is holy.
Yeah.
Like he's still teaching the Old Testament, even in his letters.
Sure.
Paul is like, it's so funny that they think that, there's these like transitionary commandments that were given in Acts 15 until the temple was destroyed, and then the law fully went away somehow. And it just reminds me of like, they don't, because the people usually making those claims aren't very studied in the word. Some are, but many aren't. And I just want to take them right to like 1 Corinthians 9 or Ephesians 4 and show them Paul citing the law from Deuteronomy 24, talking about, don't muzzle the ox while treading the grain, or in Ephesians 4, don't kidnap people. Well, that wasn't part of those first initial 4 in Acts 15. What's going on here? Is he a heretic now that's teaching, do you put you back under the law? No, he's talking to the Corinthians in Macedonia and the Ephesians in Ephesus, with ancient Anatolia. So like he's not talking to the Jews in Judea, and so it's very interesting to see. Usually the deeper you get into these conversations, you realize that the people making these claims and defending these claims are not as studied. And I don't want to try to sound like arrogant by saying that.
Sure.
That's just been my observation, my genuine observation. The first time I had a discussion with Dr. Solberg, that came up very quickly. I took him right to Exodus, and he was completely unaware with what I was talking about. He had no clue what I was talking about, and I'm like, here it is, right in the text. Let's put it on screen together and read it together. And I, I'm not trying to make fun of him or belittle him, but again, it just falls right into my observation of, I think when I went to Bible school, granted it's not seminary, but when I went to Bible school, I was taught a specific interpretation of the Bible.
Right.
We did not go line by line through the Bible. And I think a lot of pastors are trained up in that same bad practice. They're not actually reading the book to understand it. They're reading enough of it just to get to their next sermon.
I was in Calvary Chapel for many years, and what I love about Calvary Chapel is they, by and large, teach verse by verse. I mean, it's really great. But even so, if you still have your glasses on, then you're going to read the same text, and you're going to say, "Oh, that's nice, right? That's for the Jews." And that's what I did. Like, I'm totally guilty of that. I was reading the entire Bible. I loved the entire Bible, but I had my glasses on, and so I would come to various passages, and I'm like, well, I was like, well, that's really interesting. That's for the Jews, and that's why I couldn't understand about the 2 houses for so long, because I had those glasses on, and only when I got a crack in one of them, I was like, wait, I'm gonna take these things off, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm in trouble, right? Because you start seeing all this other stuff, and the cool thing is that it's encouraging, because you can finally put your Bible puzzle together and not have extra pieces lying around. For me, that was always a problem. I had all these extra pieces that just didn't fit in the puzzle. And I was like, well, maybe one day I'll figure those out. But once I let go of pre-trib rapture, I let go of dispensationalism, I realized that I am now part of, I'm not replacing, but I'm part of Israel. And, so some years ago, a couple of guys and me, we wrote a book called Commonwealth Theology Essentials. and I've written recently God's Divorce, which is a much more user-friendly version of that. And it's a very simple story. You know, it's the gospel. It's the same two main players throughout the entire book. It's God and Israel. God and Israel get married. God and Israel get divorced. Israel can't come back because that breaks the law. So the husband dies to bring her back. What a gorgeous story. It's not God starting over. I finally got rid of that law stuff, and now I can turn my attention to the church. That's the scenario that I heard growing up. I heard it when I was teaching at Calvary Chapel. I heard it all the time. And it was really hard for me to leave that paradigm, to leave that understanding. I felt like I was going to go to hell. I felt like I was betraying God. I felt like I was putting myself under the law, or I was doing something that was cheating, you know. And it, little by little, I kept just kind of testing the branch. I'm like, is this thing going to break on me, you know? And I kind of like, okay, I think I'll get a little further out on this limb and see where it goes. And I discovered, oh my goodness, this isn't a branch. This is a floor. And this whole new foundation came into view. And once I could fully embrace it, man, the whole Bible came alive in ways I had not expected. But I remember just tiptoeing around the book of Ephesians, you know, and I'm like, wait, you Gentiles, you once were Gentiles, but you're not anymore. Now you're part of the Commonwealth of Israel. I was like, does that say what I think it says? Because that's what I'm reading, and I'm looking at the Greek. I'm trying to double check this and thinking maybe I'm just nuts. But no, there it was, and it revolutionized my entire understanding of Bible. Of course, that's when I became an utter heretic by most people's standards. I'm going straight to hell, you know.
So,
Well, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say real quick, because Dr. Hamp, you brought up like Acts 15 of those 4 laws, and so many people only focus, you know, like on those 4 laws. And, you know, it's Sean, kind of like what you mentioned earlier, everything else we can apparently do as long as we don't do those 4 laws. And it's so weird. Like, I remember for before I got into the plumbers union, I had to take some tests, have an interview, but then I got in, right? I did my 4 laws. I got in now, but I'm still not a plumber. And I remember even as a first year, I was talking with the guy and he was like, hey, dude, we're plumbers. And I remember there was an old school guy. You're not plumbers. You don't know how to do this and that. And it took 5 years of going, you know, we went to work, but we had class. We had to go to the class. I was able to get in because I followed those 4 laws. But then we learned how to do so many other things: underground, sprinkler fitting, welding, brazing. We were tested in everything, because when you keep reading, once you do those 4 laws, you got in. And then what was read to you? The law of Moses.
Yeah.
All of these things were so important for me as a plumber, as a commercial industrial plumber, to learn how to do everything. Like, that's what made me a plumber.
And then once you became a full plumber, that was the end of all your training. You didn't have to, you left it all aside and you forgot it all. Is that right?
yeah. Apparently, I don't need to know code anymore. I can do whatever I want. You know, just hurry up to the plumbing, throw the drywall up. The inspector will never see it. But
Christ
no,
is the end of the law, man, right there. See,
right? But you know, you're read the law of Moses, right? Why would the law of Moses be read to all these people if it meant nothing? Right? I had to go through all these classes because it meant something for me. For me to be called a plumber, I had to know all these things. And I think, shouldn't the same mindset be for us to be called not a Jew, but for us to be called a Christian, a Christ-like one, Yeshua-like one? We listen, we graduate, and we maintain those teachings and take it with us.
Yes.
But for some reason, there's a disconnect between that.
Massive. Yeah.
I had some Calvary Chapel guys in my living room. I did some work for them years back, and I asked them what the new covenant was, and one of them said, well, it's Jesus, and the other one said, well, it's Matthew to Revelation. And again, not knocking them, and they understood what they did, and they're good Christian people, you know, in the modern sense of the word. But we went to Jeremiah 31 and read the biblical definition of the new covenant, and I remember their eyes got, you know, big like Aggie marbles. You know, they just never heard that before. Right. Even though they do. Dr. Hamp's right. They go verse by verse. They do expository teaching at Calvary Chapel. It's interesting that so many times in my career of pumping septic tanks, I meet all kind of different people. I've done it for almost 30 years, and usually the question will be, what are those strings hanging on your shirt? And they're referring to the tassels that I wear, on the four corners. And I explained to them this, and then, well, do you go to church on Sunday? No, I don't go to church on Sunday. Well, you only eat certain things. Yeah, I only eat certain things. And then they'll say, well, what religion are you? And I'll always say, well, I'm a Christian. I have no problem with the word Christian. And they'll say, I've never met a Christian like you. Going back to that story that Dr. Hamp told about the two guys, where the one guy said you can't be Jewish and Christian. When what Will said, the word Christian, Christianos, means a follower, a disciple of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Every disciple, when he's fully trained, is supposed to be like his teacher, Luke 6:40.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just odd to me that they would look at us and say, you don't look like Christians, when the reality is we do. We're trying to follow Yeshua, not just in taking care of the widows and the orphans and, being kind to people. We do those things. Those are all part of discipleship too. But also we go further, with Shabbat or kosher laws or tzitzit. We're being like Yeshua. Yeshua, if he walked around today, he wouldn't be in a 3-piece suit, going to, the local Methodist church down the street. I mean,
But would he be on TikTok?
He wouldn't be Joel
he's a
Osteen?
Jewish man.
Would he be on TikTok? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if he'd use TikTok or not.
You see Peter uploading his videos to TikTok. Yeah. No, I think Matthew, I think I've joked about this with you before, but your experience in pumping septic tanks is no better evangelist training than that, because you are literally on TikTok pumping that human excrement as you try to evangelize.
I would never do that. I hate anything with black water. Oh man. So yeah, you're more of a man than me, brother
You
Matthew.
are specifically trained to get on the online apologetics. But guys, I'm going to jump back to this video. And yeah, obviously, if the law is done away with, hide your kids, hide your wife, because they've taken everybody out here. Like, it's going to get crazy. There's no rules. It's all fair game. But that's not what we see the apostles saying throughout the rest of the New Testament,
How do I want to say this? If the old covenant food restrictions were still in effect when Peter had that vision, we then have a vision where Jesus is commanding Peter to sin. And I don't imagine any scenario in which vision or right in front of your face that Jesus would ever command anyone to commit a sin.
And Matthew, that's why I was having that conversation with you last week.
See,
that's why it's so important to understand that the animals on the sheet.
Yeah, this is the thing. The voice never told Peter, rise up, kill, and eat the unclean. That's not what the voice said.
That's right.
It just said, rise, kill, and eat. Peter, he's looking at all the animals. So he immediately thinks, well, the voice is telling me eat the unclean, and maybe the clean was there beside the unclean. I've never eaten anything common or unclean. The voice responds, what God has made clean, call not koinos, not akathartos. The voice doesn't use akathartos. Call not koinos. So the voice is telling Peter in the vision, we know what the meaning is, but in the vision, rise up and eat the clean animals beside the unclean animals. Peter mistakenly thinks he's telling him to eat all of them, but then, he's perplexed. Remember, the modern Christian interpretation, they say, oh, it's so easy to see. We read it. We got it. Easy. We can go eat the BLT now. Yeah. But Peter was perplexed. He was deeply perplexed. Some Bibles say, what in the world does this mean? Because Peter knew that the Lord, whether it was Yahweh or Yeshua speaking to him from heaven, he knew the Lord wouldn't tell him to do something different than the Lord exampled when he lived on the earth. Jesus never ate unclean. And so eventually Peter got it. And, like Dr. Hamp tried to tell Dr. Solberg, he didn't say, God showed me not to call any person common or unclean, and that we can now violate the previous dietary law. That was never in Acts 10. As Brother Oblias said, it was also not in Acts 11. It's not difficult, but traditions have made it difficult. Christian traditions have made it difficult.
Yeah, I've always wondered why, like, if the animals on the sheet were just all unclean, it seems like you would have a completely different experience versus, okay, so this is just a personal vision of Peter, right? By himself. Okay. that he has to explain to people later. That seems to be the opposite of the Mount Sinai experience, where there's millions of people witnessing Moses receive the instructions from Yahweh. They see Acts 24:10, the God of Israel on the firmament piece. They see the feet of the God of Israel. Like they see the angels there. They go up and have, the Shavuot meal with him on the mountainside. Like there's all these witnesses to this event where the covenant instructions are given out. But yet suddenly all that goes away with one guy's personal vision. Well, this is setting a precedent for Muhammad to come along. Like this is a horrible way to create new doctrine. You know what I mean? But that nobody ever really takes into account. Hey, wait a minute. One guy can't have a vision and then suddenly rewrite all the law. Like that's not how the law was established. That's not how it works. I'm sorry,
Smith. You have no argument against anyone if that's your standard. If you're saying there's one guy can go have a vision and change everything, then anything can mean anything. We have no clue of truth.
A guy named Joseph Smith did that exactly, right?
Hey, I wanted to ask you guys real quick too, because I've heard this example where God would be causing Peter to sin and everything like that. I would always ask people, and I would never get an answer from it. But did God then sin when he told Abraham to offer Isaac? I mean that's more of like the whole human sacrifice ideal, and obviously the eating isn't on that same level, but I've never gotten an answer from that, because if anything, that would make it's almost more of a worse situation, if we're gonna kind of like look at it from the same lens point, but then no, God didn't sin. I'm like, well, okay, well then how do we equivocate this? How do we make all this, in harmony? And I've never gotten an answer, but that's one question I'll always ask people when I hear that.
I'm going to stay out of this for a minute because people may not agree with my answer, but I want to hear from everybody else first.
My understanding is, and it's definitely something you get asked as a pastor, by people. Well, what about when God says kill your only begotten son? My understanding is that because human sacrifice was prevalent during the time of Abraham, that it wouldn't have been a shocker for the God that Abraham served to say something like that to Abraham, even though he had no intention of Abraham ever doing it. So for God to say that to Abraham was not saying this is something that I require, permit, or desire, but it was very prevalent in the nations of the world at that time. So I'll test Abraham to see his loyalty towards me, knowing that good and well, when he lifts his hand, I, through my angel, am going to grab his hand and stop him from doing it. And I think Abraham recognized this by telling Isaac, God has or will provide a ram for himself. And that's exactly what happened. Yahweh Yireh, Yahweh will see to it. He will provide. They saw the ram in the thicket. The ram was offered up as a burnt offering. That's my understanding of the text. Before I understood Acts 10 more deeply, that was my first go-to wheel. I would tell people, well, why did God tell Abram to offer up his son? I think two different things are going on, but it's definitely a question to ask and to ponder on and answer. So I want to hear what Sean says now.
I'll wait for everyone else to go.
Okay.
I concur with Mr. Matthew. I think I want to hear Sean too at this point.
Well, I think as far as the motivation of Abraham, I do agree with Matthew. He does announce God will provide a ram. Okay, so it seems like Abraham is already thinking, okay, I know Yahweh better than this. Something's about to happen here, right?
Right.
Hebrews 11 tells us the mindset of Abraham. He knew that Isaac would just get resurrected and it wouldn't be a permanent thing anyway, right? So because the promise had to come through Isaac, so he knew that he promised Isaac would be the one from whom this promise would happen. And so Isaac, to my understanding, had not had children yet at this point. To my calculations, he's about 30 years old at this point. He doesn't get married to his like 62. And so there ain't no way, right? He has to be resurrected to have this promise fulfilled. And we're past the Genesis 15 moment. Yahweh already shared the promise and Abraham already believed the promise. And so now in these past 30 years, Abraham has been proven himself to know Yahweh better, to walk with Yahweh, to know his heart and his ways. And now that's from the Protestant canon of 66. We go into the book of Jubilees. If you're Ethiopian, you would have a different
Sure,
perspective.
sure.
You'd be raised with a little bit more detail. And you would say in Jubilees that there was 10 different ways, according to chapter 16 and 17, that Abraham was tested by Yahweh to determine his faithfulness. And this is just one of those 10. The death of Sarah was another one as well. But it was basically this concept with offering Isaac was actually proposed by Satan in the same vein that Job, the conflict with Job was proposed by Satan as well. And so Yahweh is actually allowing this concept to be in. So according to the book of Jubilees, there is an angel there, like Matthew said, that the one that shouts from heaven to stop him, as well as Satan is there watching. And it says Satan was ashamed that day because it realized that Abraham was faithful to Yahweh and that he was going to go through with it. And because Satan said he'll never go through with it. So it was more of a wager between Satan and God, same way we have with the precedent with Job. This is what Jubilees claims. And that's what even prompted the whole situation. It wasn't Yahweh's idea.
I appreciate that understanding, Sean. I mean, I don't remember that part, but I've not studied Jubilees like you have. But and I could, hey, I have no problem saying that could be the understanding of that text. That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, just something to consider, guys. I know it's not accepted by everybody, but it runs alongside the precedent of the Job 1 and 2, right? Where God's not just sitting around desiring to take one of his best servants and destroy his life. Right? In the same way, he's not sitting around desiring to give conflicting instruction to Abraham to destroy the seed that he just had. He just waited so long to have birth. You know what I mean? So it was actually a test proposed by the enemy that both men passed. So just something to consider. And for everyone out there listening, if you've never actually researched the manuscript history of Jubilees and all of its ancient Christian historical implications, how the early church used it, how the manuscripts are passed around under different names. It's a big study, and I think that's modern day Christianity doesn't talk about it, so it's kind of a niche study. But I'm not just speaking on my backside. I've done a lot of historical research on it. So,
Sure.
But other than that, guys, we have a few more minutes to go through, and there's just a lot of fun stuff we're about to run into in this conversation.
Break the law.
Yeah. Although if it wasn't about food, because, Peter himself says, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish person to associate with or visit anyone from another nation. And what you said is that is not in the Torah.
Yeah, that's more of a social law.
Yeah, it's a social moray, right?
Yep.
And so here's his conclusion. God has shown me that I shall not call any person common or unclean.
Yep.
So from Peter's own interpretation, he's not saying, oh, now I know that pork is on the menu. He's saying, no, God was shaking me up because I was not willing to associate with non-Jewish people because I thought they were unclean. And so now he's gotten the message.
Right. Well, so how did he come to that conclusion is an interesting question.
Well, I mean,
I would submit that Jesus said, first of all, the vision was about food. There were no Gentiles in the vision. It was all food. And we know it was about eating food because Jesus said, Peter, kill and eat. So we know the subject matter of the vision was food. And here's how I would understand that vision with what Peter later concluded, right? He gets up, he leaves Joppa and goes to the Cornelius's house. He said, wait a second. If all food is clean, and Jesus said not to call any food unclean, that means I can now associate with Gentiles. So to me, that's the logical step that Peter took there, which matches what the Torah teaches, and it also matches what the rest of the New Testament teaches about food.
But suddenly Peter's going to go against what the Torah teaches.
Right.
In regards to the food.
Yeah.
So this is just a comment real quick. I'm sorry, Sean. I know you want to get through this video. This is just so weird to me. So Daniel, when we see the bear coming out of the ocean, we see the leopard with 4 heads. It's not about nations. It's not about rulers. It's not about kingdoms. It's about a literal leopard with 4 heads and wings. It's going to come out of the ocean, and we just need to stare at the ocean until we observe this to happen. I mean, how silly. Nobody reads Revelation and literally is going to be like, oh, yeah, there's going to be a red dragon that comes out of the sky, and there's going to be this giant beast that comes out of the earth, and everyone's going to worship this Leviathan, literal Leviathan sea monster, and there's a literal woman in the sky, and she's going to give birth in space. I mean, this is silly. This is
I wish, Jesus called us sheep, so I wish I could get sheared once a year and lose 20 pounds once a year.
I mean, come on. This is so silly, and this bothers me because this is so I actually didn't know that Solberg does he have a PhD?
Just got it.
He just got it. Okay, because I'm so used to Professor Solberg, and I saw the PhD. I'm like, he's got a doctorate, but he's got a doctorate. If I had Brother Matthew come to pump out my septic tank and he had like no idea what to do and he's on his phone watching YouTube videos, I would just be like, brother, what? I thought you knew what you were doing, right?
Like I will, just a few more minutes. I will.
I'm getting to the good part. No, I would honestly, like, respectfully, Matthew, I love you. I would lose respect for you as someone who claims to pump it out, or like, look, I'm a plumber, and if your guys are asking me code, well, I don't know, YouTube it. Like, you're gonna lose respect for me. And this is like, man, this is really hard for me. Like, I'm really struggling with this. Like, we're still saying this is literally about food. Well, and Dr. Hamp, when he says to you, well, Dr. Hamp, it says food, so it has to be about food. Come on, brother. At this point, if with that kind of logic, Dr. Solberg should be doing the Eucharist, thinking it's the real presence and body and blood of Christ.
I think the conclusion is crazy too. The conclusion leads you to like a Nicolaitan place of, well, the Gentiles commit fornication, so I guess now commit fornication will be with the Gentiles. The Gentiles kill people, so now we should start unaliving people too because we can be with the Gentiles. The argument that in order to be around Gentiles, you need to break the law is crazy. Again, what Peter makes about being around unlearned men is to bring the men to the light, not for you to become the darkness. That doesn't make any sense. Live such good lives among the heathens that they glorify God on the day you return, not live such heathenish lives around the heathens that all y'all become one heathenistic nation. It doesn't make any sense. What's the point? I can just continue to live life I lived before I came to Christ. Why did I come to Christ? Why did I come to Yeshua if the idea is just for me to go be as heathenistic as possible with the heathens? I don't understand.
That's right. Yeah, and my thing is, Christ resurrected and had 40 days before ascending back, and he spent that time visiting with his disciples and to 500 other people to prove that he had resurrected. Why didn't he announce all these changes then? Right. Like why wait 10 to 15 years to Acts chapter 10 to share this just with Peter and nobody else? Come on. None of this makes any sense to the precedent of how God speaks to his prophets previously.
And it's the underlying again, I go back to Marcion, that this Marcionistic spirit that people have, that God's laws were bad and now we're free from them. I mean, that is such an affront to God. It really it pits God against himself. It's the Old Testament versus the New Testament. It's that Jewish God versus the Christian God. This is all the subtext that people don't really want to say out loud because it's not really pretty. But that is what they're saying. If you really press them, they're going to say that the God of the Old Testament kind of had, well, he was much more corporate. He was definitely into HR, and we got to do things by the book. And, if you want to be my people, you got to do these things. But then New Testament, he's wearing, flip-flops and Birkenstocks, and he's a real hippie. And now it's just all love, love, love. And it's like, no, it's the same God, guys. And they talk about, the law of Moses has been done away with. It's God's laws. It's Jesus. If Jesus is God, that's how I see it. If Jesus is God, then, well, those are Jesus' laws, right? Jesus was the one who communicated those commandments. Not just things that Moses came up with. I mean, my goodness. But that's what he kept going to. We don't have to keep the law of Moses. And I just could not get through to him that, hey, these are God's laws. They're not Moses' laws. These are God's.
It's like the point I was making Colossians 2. When they bring the Colossians 2 argument and they read it and say that the Messiah disarmed the rulers and authorities and triumphed over them. Oh, that was the law. Well, did he disarm and triumph over himself or his father? However you see it. What did he do? Disarm himself and disarm the father doesn't make any sense. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though, I mean, all food was always clean. It was I think for me, the real question is, what is food? Okay. And
Yes.
I think Leviticus 11 defines pretty clearly what food is and what it isn't. I mean, for example, I don't think rat is food. Do you think rat is food? I'm not really sure.
Not food for me.
Why not?
Right? Is it edible? Is it edible?
He said, rise, kill, and eat.
Yeah.
Rise, kill, and eat. If you believe it, it's an imperative. It's not a suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you believe it, hey, put some works with your faith, brother. Don't say, well, it's not food for me. Well, he said, rise, kill, and eat.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every live I give the example of, if I'm invited to my house and I said, man, you can go in my kitchen, you go in my house, you grill whatever you want, brother. The grill's fired up out back, have a good time. I would not expect to come home and you've grilled my cat. Right? It
That's
just doesn't
right.
make
That's
sense.
right.
My cat isn't food, and you understand this. You wouldn't grill my cat like I wouldn't grill your dog. But somehow when it comes to the Bible, we can understand that food is not just anything that has life in it, doesn't equal food.
That's right.
That's a good example, brother.
Yes. If I was
Well, there's
dying
lots of
on
things that are edible.
a desert island and all there were to eat were rats, and if I don't eat them, I die, I will eat them. They'll be food. They'll supply energy to my body. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things you can stick in your mouth, right? It doesn't make it food necessarily.
Yeah.
Right?
But we also have
mean,
situations where
Yeah.
in the Torah, a food that is naturally clean, we're told if that food touches an unclean vessel, then it's not clean anymore.
Right.
And
But
Is that in the Torah? Did you guys hear that?
Leviticus 11, there
It
is a portion of Leviticus 11
If
that,
it's a dead carcass, right?
well, it's talking about like cooking utensils, and it's dealing with the creeping things, like the unclean creeping things there towards the end of Leviticus 11. Is that correct, Dr.
but
Hamp?
we totally believe that. If a mouse gets into my mixing pan,
Or maybe I misheard him.
and then I put, some steak in there,
Right.
I'm not going to eat that steak because I'm like, gross. There was a mouse that just touched that thing. I mean, we live by that standard. I didn't have time to, really press him on that. I wish I had, but we all believe that. We all live that way. It's not even belief. It's just, we all know that that's nasty, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah, there's no 3-second rule if a rat falls into your plate.
no, a rat's in the mixing bowl and you can see it, but then you put your steak in there by mistake before cooking it. Are you still going to eat that thing? I'm not going to eat it. I'm like, ooh, that's gross.
Even Gordon Ramsay would get rid of it.
I mean, it's just, but somehow it doesn't apply to us. I think people do not think through these laws as being practical. They think that it's busy work, that God is the teacher who's just giving extra homework assignments because he wants to take your fun away for the weekend. That's how they view God. That's how they view the law. It has nothing practical about it or beneficial. It's just, well, I'm God. I said you got to do it. And that's that. Versus God's like, hey, I've got these great ideas. And trust me, you're going to really like them because they're going to make your life go better.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
that food touches an unclean vessel, then it's not clean anymore. Right. And but what we have in scripture with the clean and the unclean are actual ritual categories. It's not about germs and bacteria.
You don't think so? I do.
No.
I think it totally has to do with.
What do you see in scripture that suggests it has to do with food hygiene or nutrition?
I definitely think it has to do with it. I don't think God is so random that he's just like, I'm just not going to let you eat certain things because that's just how I am. I just don't think
the coolest thing, though. The randomness is the most amazing thing about those food laws in Leviticus 11.
They're not random at all.
Oh, they're random.
No.
What's the logic?
Okay, so this is a part that I struggle with. Again, we're not attacking Dr. Solberg. We're attacking the arguments. With that said, and I want to say this as gently as possible, because I've watched Dr. Solberg for like 4 years now, and I've seen the evolution of his rhetoric. And his rhetoric has gotten a lot softer in the past couple of years. Previously, it was pretty harsh against people who claimed that we should do the laws of God. And when I see him going, oh, but the randomness is cool though, right? It just shows how cool God is. And I'm just like, okay, this is a departure from his previous rhetoric in this type of vein of conversation. And I guess in some level, it's not as demonizing as it used to be. So I'm happy to see that, but it just doesn't seem to match that type of like cheerleading excitement about like, oh, look, God can be arbitrary because it makes him special. And we should be excited about that. That doesn't seem to match the other statements that say these people have departed from the faith. These people are departed from God's law. They're departed from the law of Christ. These people are heretical. Like he called me neck deep in heresy during our discussion. Right. So, and we were talking about the priesthood, the law, all these same things. It's just not in the same depth that you guys went into Acts chapter 10. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, well, if that's the rhetoric that I'm hearing now, I guess I'm glad it's kind of lightening up a little bit, but it just doesn't come across as very genuine, because you're like, wait a minute, you're trying to make this light and fun thing out of God being inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't sit well with
and
an
capricious
average
and
person.
whimsical, and you know, just you do it because I told you to. No, I totally radically disagree with that. Now, I do think that if God said to do it, that's enough reason. Okay, I don't need more reason. However, I don't think that's the reason that God said to do things. Okay, yes, God said it. I believe it. Amen. But why did he say it? Well, that's where I start putting my thinking cap on. That's where I start understanding that these are not just random laws, like the whole thing about Chatnez, that, well, you can't put two fabrics together because God said so. Well, no, you know, and I may not fully understand what wool and linen, why they can't touch. There are theories, and, you know, there are theories.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, God said don't do it. That's enough of a reason. But, you know, as you begin to understand the science and maybe some of that stuff, you're like, well, could be this is why. And as we begin to understand that how bad pig is for you, of course we don't want to do it. I brought up in the talk, I talked about a guy in Australia that ate a chameleon on a dare, and he died. Well, turns out God said not to eat chameleons, didn't he?
Yeah.
And yet you might get lucky and not die, but you just might die. And there could be a reason God's like, hey, don't eat those animals because they're not food, man. They're poisonous, right? They're poisonous.
That's right.
And the thing that never, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bless. Go ahead.
I was going to say what Messiah said, right? He said that which one of you, if your son asks for something to eat, you'll give him a serpent, right? How much greater is the Father in heaven? You wouldn't just tell your kids to do random stuff for no good reason, just to waste time and send them on a wild witch hunt. Why would you believe that the guy will do that to us? How much greater of a father is he to us than you are to your own children?
Good point. Deuteronomy 6:24, he's given all of his commandments for our good and our prosperity. Every one of them, Father knows best. He's a loving Father. He's not going to tell us to do something that will harm us.
And Matthew, with that too. Now, Dr. Hamp, I know you brought up about mixing the fabrics. I mean, I've read a bunch of articles, especially, you know, where we live now in, you know, 2026. I feel like science has really been our best friend to really prove God's word, right? The positive studies of people taking a rest, you know, a Sabbath rest can physically, mentally help our bodies. People live longer when they do that. Like Sean, when you're bringing up about the foods and everything like that, it has scientifically proven that these foods are better. Even of the priests of washing the hands. I remember reading an article of, I think it was like the 1800s, like the doctors started washing their hands more because of what the Levitical priests were doing.
Wow.
Mixing the fabrics, you know, I've read a lot that it actually lowers your immune system. And and Matthew, thank you for bringing up that verse. For Solberg to say, oh, God, because he's bored. Is God the kid on the anthill where he's like, don't go over there because I said so, or I'm just going to zap you with the magnifying glass? Like, I feel like that people fall Christians. Solberg's a Christian, but he falls into this like atheist argument camp where they will bring that up where, hey, God's the mean kid with the magnifying glass, not with the anthill. Don't go there because I said so. Boom, fried.
Right. Yep.
No, there's a method to the madness, you know, that's commonly said. And it's to our benefit. It's to our benefit. He's a loving father. You know, my 5 and 4-year-old don't understand to not touch the stove, but I tell them don't touch the stove when it's on, stay out of the kitchen. Right. Because it's for their benefit. You know, even with Eve, you know, God said don't eat it, don't even touch it. Right. Just stay far away from it. There's a reason, because you can't eat it if you don't touch it. All these things are for our benefits, and for him to say, oh, God's bored. I'm paraphrasing, you know, God's bored. Yeah, it's random instruction, you know, brushing it off. Like, dude, that's your holy book. I don't get it.
Is he going to get bored and not resurrect you? So
Hmm.
also, I think about another positive life lengthening instruction is not to condemn to death the righteous and innocent man. So yeah, on small levels, it's the wisdom of God that helps us out. On big levels, it's the life lengthening wisdom of God that we don't falsely convict somebody. Hey, have you guys ever studied in Genesis 21 when Abraham plants the tamarisk tree next to the altar? You guys ever studied the
Not in particular.
Yeah, so this is an amazing little nugget here about the tamarisk tree. Like not only does the resin it produces can be used according to the instructions for priests for altar worship, but also obviously the wood, but the leaves produce salt crystals on the leaves. And if you plant tamarisk trees in the desert or in dry, hot climate, it actually filters the wind and reduces it's like an air conditioner. It reduces the heat by 10 to 15 degrees.
Wow.
So the wind will blow through the tamarisk tree and the little salt crystals on the leaves drops the temperature down. So I think about that, Will, when we're talking about mixing the wool and the linen, right? Because the priests had to have the linen vestures. And I think about what we see in Exodus 24. Yahweh doesn't want, people to be, he doesn't want bodily fluids on his altar or going up the steps of his altar. He doesn't want nakedness being exposed, anything like that. You can't have human blood spill out, right? If someone's got an open wound, they can't, so like, what if the idea was, okay, let's not put our priests in something that's going to cause them to profusely sweat while they're trying to minister on my altar. And what if they already knew God's natural nature that could actually help them reduce the likelihood of them sweating, like a tamarisk tree, which is amazing natural air conditioner.
Yep.
But what's crazy about that is this discussion always just falls within the realm of food and never herbs or plants.
Mm-hmm.
So I was on a vacation several years ago. I went down to Guatemala and Belize border, and I went to see an ancient Mayan temple. And as we're walking up the side of the mountain, the tour guide, if you will, the Mayan descendant who's actually taking us up this mountain, he points to these red and blue roots that grew out of these different trees along the path. And he's like, the red roots are poison. If you touch it or eat it, you may easily die. The blue roots are the antidote. So nobody touch anything. As they were walking, he's telling everyone in the group, nobody touch anything. But they found out the hard way in the past that the red ones kill you and the blue ones are the antidote.
Right.
But no one's claiming that, suddenly we can just go and take poisonous berries, and eat poisonous roots, and just, it's only about certain products at the grocery store like pork. It's such a weird subjective really argument.
Yeah. Right? I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. The logic?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, crab, shrimp, etc. Those are bottom feeders. Catfish are bottom feeders.
It doesn't say that in Leviticus 11.
No, but we know that. We know that those animals live at the bottom of the ocean or the sea or wherever.
Sure. So you're putting
and they eat all the crap, right? They eat the excrement that floats down to the bottom, sinks down to the bottom. Right?
That's modern. That's an anachronistic view that you're imposing on Scripture, because where in Scripture does it mention anything about food safety or nutrition? Is my question.
Well, no, you're right. I agree with you. It doesn't say this is because of food safety and OSHA and all that stuff. I agree with you. But now we understand why those animals that are off the list are not healthy for us.
Well, it doesn't actually hold, though, because camel meat is some of the most nutritious red meat there is, but you're not allowed to eat camel in the Bible.
Well,
so you've got. Here's what's cool, and you may disagree with me, and that's fine. Sure. But what I think is really cool about what I call the randomness, and what the rabbis often referred to as the randomness, like these don't make sense. They had a saying, I forget what it is, but it basically said, when we don't understand the reasoning behind the commandment, we still obey it because it's in the Torah.
Sure.
And so what I think is so beautiful about the specific list of foods, like God gives sort of the criteria, right? Cloven, hoof, and all that. But if God said in his mind, I'm going to give Israel a list of foods for their health and for their benefit, because these particular foods will invite bacteria or sickness, and these particular foods will generate health, right? Then all the other Gentile nations would have noticed those same patterns. Man, when I eat pork, I constantly get a bacterial infection, and when I don't, I feel better. So what you would have then is a list of prohibited.
Okay, so By the way, guys, I don't know if y'all know this or not. I should have brought the receipts. Apparently, the Russians did find this out about pork back in the 1950s, and then the CIA actually classified it and then just redacted it in 2015. But of course, the news media is not going to pick that up. And they talked about how many cancer-causing parasites were discovered in pork.
Yeah.
And the Russians were the one that did this study 70 years ago.
Yeah.
And the American intelligence knew about it. But again, that would destroy the medical industry. There's already been, like in the last 7 or 8 years, doctors and nurses coming out, giving their testimony, how they're realizing so many of these diseases are related to parasites and not, and not carcinogens in other regards like they thought initially. Right? It's just parasites in your body that's creating all these diseases. And so I think it's fascinating that man can figure this out. The nations, Russia, has figured this out and documented it.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's lots of doctors that will tell you that. I mean, I read some time ago that the worst food you can eat is bacon. Like, it literally is the worst food. It's incredibly bad for you. And pork is very, very bad for you. People still get worms in their brains, even though they cook it better and all that stuff, but it still happens. And just because it doesn't kill you instantaneously doesn't mean that it's good for you. And, he was almost making the case for me, right? Like, there's some things that have bacteria and then we're not supposed to eat. I'm like, well, yeah, like that's the whole point. But he wants to believe that God is just random and he just gave a random list. No, he didn't. And why? Oh my gosh. It's almost, it's kind of frustrating, right? It's like really frustrating. You're like, dude, God is not random. All of his laws are for your blessing. As Matthew quoted, everything he gives is for your good, not for your randomness, not to say, sorry, the other people can go play ball, but you can't, but that's really good for you, Johnny. Like, no, Johnny's like, I want to go play ball. Why can't I play ball? Well, because I said so. And trust me, one day you're going to understand. No, he won't. But, but this is where God's saying, no, this really is better for you. And the nations will eventually figure it out and they'll follow suit. And when we stop putting things in our bodies that are not healthy, we enjoy the benefits thereof. Like, it's that simple.
So go ahead, Will.
Oh, sorry, Sean. I was just real quick. One thing that really bothered me was, like, Dr. Hamp, he's pushing you. Well, show me where God says that it's not for our best health. Sean, you were doing, I think it was on your channel where Matthew and I were on, and Matthew, you said something really, really powerful. You were talking about the whole Sermon on the Mount when Yeshua said, you've heard it said that, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, if you look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery. Right. Though, and one of the things you said was, are we honestly going to believe that God was okay if we just stare at women and lust over them before, like in the Old Testament? And is that suddenly okay? The same, I think, line of reasoning would go with Solberg. Well, hey, the Torah just says, don't commit adultery. It doesn't say that. Like, we can't, like, hey, let's go to the yoga class and let's just stare at women all day and lust after them. Oh, that one's beautiful. Oh, look at that one. No, it's still going to be wrong. And I think Solberg would admit that lusting, hating your brother, all those things are still wrong, even though it verbatim does not say it. Why can't we, again, use that same line of reasoning? To your point, Dr. Hamp, we know what the bottom feeders are. We know what they do. We know what they eat, everything like that. Mm-hmm. But just because it doesn't say in the Torah verbatim, like, oh, well, those are bottom feeders. They basically eat the poop and the garbage of the ground, everything. We need all that. I mean, it's getting ridiculous, and I get your frustration. Man, I
always give my personal example. Like, my mother told me when I was young, wash the dishes. And I washed the dishes because I didn't want to get a whoop and get my game taken, right? But when I grow up and I get my own house and I don't wash the dishes, I realize if you don't wash the dishes, your house is going to stink. You're going to get these little flies everywhere. No one wants to come over because you're the dirty guy. You didn't take out the trash. All the things that your mother taught you had a purpose. Now, it took us a while to understand them with the pig and the bottom feeders. It took humanity a while to catch up to God. But
Right.
God already had these things in mind, and to say, well, my mother already had these things in mind. I went all the way to Oskaloosa, Iowa to play football. She said, boy, you gonna want me to come to some of your games? I didn't care. I wanted to go to Iowa until the next season. I said, man, I would love to have a moment in my game. It just took me a while to realize she was correct. In the same way with God, it took humanity a while, but God always had a reasoning for the things that he.
Yeah. And she didn't have to explain to you every reason why you had to wash the dishes. Son, if you don't wash dishes, then bacteria will collect and then it'll make us all sick. Like, she probably said, just wash the dishes, son, because and that was enough. But as you grew up, then you understood the rationale, even though it wasn't explicitly stated. And that's what God has done for us. And is it a coincidence that the very animals he said, these are not food, turns out now we know that they're bottom feeders, etc. I mean, goodness, just do the math, right? It's not even complicated.
Yeah, it's like the argument, if I'm understanding Dr. Solberg right, his argument is that God made everything for food and then just decided with the nation of Israel, I'm going to pick out some things you can't eat. But boy, it sure would have been nice if they could have rabbit while in the desert. You know how fast rabbits breed? Like they could have had a healthy supply of rabbit to eat while in the desert instead of him having to send the quail in.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it, but he
Good point.
he already initially created that not to be food, right? So it's just, even coming from this arbitrary argument of, it could all be clean, it's all permissible now, that doesn't make any sense, and it just directly goes against the words that Yahweh said, like, my law, Psalm 119, my law is established in the heavens. Not that it's arbitrarily being given out here and there on the earth. Like, it's established in the heavens first. So
let me just add something to that, because I think this is something that both the church and Hebrew roots Torah kind of people we miss often. Is God's laws are not arbitrary things that he came up with. Rather, they are descriptive of how the world works. But we often think that they are prescriptive, that like with Congress and the Senate, that they're like, hey, we have this idea for a bill, right? I'm just a bill. And suddenly, like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a law against, XYZ, and everybody votes on it and boom, it's a law. But then we can repeal it 5 years later. That's not how God's laws work. They're just like the laws of gravity, aerodynamics, anything in the physical realm. Those laws are simply a spectrum of these other laws. And just like if you jump off a cliff, you will fall to the ground and you will likely die. That's a law. Well, if you murder, that's also a law. It's a natural kind of law. We just don't understand it in that sense, but it is the same basic thing. We understand this intuitively. What do you think is going to happen if I go and murder somebody? Do you think my life's going to be better? No. Now, I may get away with it, so to speak, for a little while, but I'll have the whole conscious thing. I'll have people that are not trusting me. Word will get out eventually, and one way or another, it's going to come back and bite me. It may take longer than jumping off a cliff, right? But it will come back and bite me eventually. Stealing. Eventually, it will come back and bite me. It may take decades until it catches up with me, but still, it will catch up with me. And that's what I think people inherently misunderstand. And they think, oh, God told me to keep his laws. And when I finally understood that I'm not keeping God's laws for God, he gave them for me. It revolutionized my life and my understanding, because I'm not keeping Sabbath for God to make God happy. Right? That would be God creating me for the Sabbath. No, God created the Sabbath for me. And when it finally clicked, right? It took way too long. And when it finally clicked, I was like, oh, this is a gift from God to me. I'm not keeping Sabbath and saying, God, are you keeping score? You notice that I'm keeping Sabbath, right? I'm getting some points for this, right? God said, you're not getting any points here, Doug. I made it for you. I made it for you. And all these things I am telling you to do or not do are for you. Right? That's the blessing, instead of we're just collecting points. But because people have this in their minds, we've been poisoned. The well has been poisoned. C.I. Scofield, in his notes, he said that God took Israel to Sinai and he offered them grace, but they said, no. We'll take some of that law. That looks a lot better to us. And so they rashly accepted the law. Oh my goodness! I wish I could smack that guy. What do you mean they rashly accepted the law? This is not like God's like, the shady salesman. Hey, I'll sell you a watch. Oh yeah, it's a real Rolex. Like you big dummies. You should have really checked that thing out. Like that's the implication, is that God is a shady salesman. And they could have had it really good, but he pulled a fast one on them, and they got this dud. Oh my gosh, what has happened to us? But that's the kind of mentality that the church has at large about the law.
Kind of back to the Marcion point you made earlier, right? They got like God's a boogeyman, like he's this demiurge who just hates humanity and wanted to destroy us.
Exactly. Yeah.
You guys want to know a little strange historical nugget? Schofield was the mentor of a guy named Charles Ryrie, who was the founder of the Dallas Theological Seminary and one of the first proponents of free grace theology.
Wow. I'm familiar with the Ryrie Study Bible. So, and I grew up here I grew up in the Pentecostal church. So you hear C.I. Schofield, but I did not ever realize what Dr. Hamp just said, that how Schofield interpreted Mount Sinai there. It's the first time I heard that. It just, I'm just like, because I've been in this mentality for so long now, in the Torah keeping mentality since like 1997. So my paradigm is completely reversed. I'm as far away from Marcion as I can get. So when I hear something like that, I'm thinking of 176 verses in Psalm 119. It's just it's an impossible interpretation. It doesn't even click with me. So it just blows my mind.
Yeah,
I used to
Ryrie?
teach basic theology by Ryrie. I used to teach that for years. I would teach them that. And boy, they make that wall between the Jews and the church. They make it mile high. It goes up into heaven and into eternity, and never the twain shall meet. There's two different destinies, two different people groups, two different locations where we're up in heaven and the Jews are down on earth, and all this stuff. And it's terrible.
And how many pastors has the Dallas Theological Seminary trained over the last 100 years? And the Ryrie Study Bible sold over 2 million copies.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
so this is what we're dealing with.
Yep.
Foods that follows man-made logic that all nations would eventually ascribe to as they learned what's good for you and what's not and all that. What we have in scripture,
I got to push back a little bit.
Hold on, I'll let me finish this thought, and then I'll shut up.
Yeah.
So, but God says, I'm giving you a list of foods. I'm not telling you why I chose this animal and didn't choose this animal. The only reason you need to know, God said, is because I commanded it. And if I commanded it, that's why you're going to obey it. That makes people who come across this tribe in the desert and says, why don't you eat these foods? They're delicious, right? And they say, because our Lord has separated us from those foods. And the people then, the perception then would be, oh, you're the Israelites, those who were called by Yahweh. So it's their special identity. It's the fact that they're a holy nation that God made a random list of animals. Okay, I'm done. Thank you for indulging me.
No, of course. I mean, of course. I was biting.
You want to be included in that holy nation?
I mean, you were saying that all nations would eventually figure this out, but I think the logic there really breaks down, because people eat a lot of stupid stuff, and we know that it's bad for us. Not even going to the Bible. I mean, there's all kinds of junk food.
Going to your local bar.
Studies galore that we know it's garbage, and yet people keep doing it. People are into meth, even though that's really bad for you. So I think that breaks down by itself, because people don't always do what is logical and what is reasonable. They do what tastes good, what feels good, what.
Did you guys know that underground vampire cults are on the rise?
Really? Wow.
Cults of people get together and they're eating blood for fun. It's on the rise. Yeah.
Wow.
Not good.
Yep.
What seems okay. So
well, and so to be fair, that's just Rob's theory. The Bible does not say that's the reason for randomness. So I'll readily admit that. Yeah. But it also doesn't say it has anything to do with nutrition or food safety. That's imported into scripture.
I agree with you. You're right. So and so my bias is that God is good, God is love, and he's not random. He's good. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. these are not just random things that he came up with, but God has given me the secret book for success, you know, and if you follow these principles, then life goes better for you. You're going to experience blessings versus curses, you know, and some of them are incredibly obvious. When you do dumb stuff, you kind of, you know, FAFO, right? As it were.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, well, go ahead and see what happens, you know?
Yeah.
We should change that to law around and be blessed. LABB, law around and be blessed.
I like it.
Like it too.
That's a good point. I do believe God has our best interests at heart. But here's the thing too, I would say, if we want to keep going on this track, is that God only commanded those restrictions, the animal restrictions of Israel. So for us to think that those are for the health of Israel, it must mean that he doesn't care about the health of the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Assyrians. He never judges them for eating pork or anything. He didn't put any restrictions on them. That combined with the fact that the ritual clean and uncleanness in Scripture is ritual, not biological. We know this because God says things like this. If something touches something, it's unclean until the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God understands that bacteria doesn't just go away when the sun goes down and now it's clean again. But God isn't talking in bacterial categories. He's talking in ritual categories. So I think for those
ritual, what's the word for ritual in Hebrew?
This is a good point, brother.
Don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
It's a descriptor that I'm using to describe.
But that's an English gloss. That doesn't exist in the Hebrew. Ceremonial, ritual, it's just not in the Hebrew.
Well, you understand the meaning when I say ritual, right? We could use a different word.
But that's an English gloss. That's something that the translators.
But is it inaccurate?
A little biased. Yeah, it's not accurate because
you don't think you don't think the difference is, let's see, how would we say if I don't want to say the word ritual?
There's no such word in Hebrew or in
right, but is there a concept of sacredness?
It just says that you're unclean. You know, it's not. We add the word ritual and purity. It just says you're unclean. You know, you're tameh.
Right, but tameh doesn't carry the idea. We can leave the words out of it that you don't like in English. It doesn't carry the idea of bacterial uncleanness.
Well, how do you know that? I mean,
because God says the thing is clean. The God says the thing that became unclean will be clean in the evening. He also says,
it seems like he's trying to conflate the idea of, you know, the cleanliness required to step before the tabernacle versus other times of uncleanliness that a person would experience naturally in life.
Right.
Am I understanding that right?
I think so. And again, I think this is where our well-meaning Sunday brothers are just clueless about the practicality of this. Like, we go through our day in different states of clean and unclean. And what people don't understand is that the Levites were essentially nuclear power plant technicians. And when they were to go into the reactor, they had to put on special garments. They had to make sure that they didn't have any extra sweat and other things that could have some kind of chemical reaction. I mean, just ask Nadav and Abihu, hey, how did it go, guys? Not so well. Turns out earth garden variety fire doesn't work so well with God's fire. It turns out the two don't mix and you have an explosion. Okay, maybe don't do that from now on. And what happens is they take these very specific technical laws for a technical group called the Levites, and then an even more technical group called the Kohanim, that they had to do things incredibly by the book, or they would get toasted. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a big deal. Just like the nuclear technician, just like the person who works in a clean room, just like the person who has to go and perform surgery, you have to take special precautions or bad things happen. But for the average person, you know, you wash your hands once a day or twice a day or every time you use the bathroom. That's easy enough. But if you're a doctor, you better wash your hands like thoroughly, man, before you go and do surgery. You got to wash them and you got to wash them again. You got to wash them again and again. And so that's a whole different level of hand washing. My cat wants to, of course, walk on my computer. Come on, kitty. There we go. So, you know, that's what we're getting at. And he doesn't understand this. And so he wants to have all this different, you know, ritual uncleanness. And that is one of the things that translators, I think, really pulled a fast one, because they're like, oh, ceremonially unclean. It doesn't say that. It just says you're unclean. It just says that this is dirty. And when you don't take a shower, you're unclean. And if you're going to go into the temple and you're going to be close to God's presence, which was like this massive energy, yes, you'd better go in there well prepared and clean, or there can be catastrophic consequences.
So, Dr. Hamp, you remember in Leviticus 16 where the priests are supposed to change their clothes after going in the Holy Holies, but it doesn't really tell you why. It does tell you why in Ezekiel 44:19, and it says that and when it's about the priests who just were in the holies of holies, they would, when they go out to the outer court, into the outer court or to the people, they shall take off their garments in which they have been ministering and lay them in the holy chambers, and then put on different garments so that they don't transfer holiness to the people because of their previous garments. So your radiation analogy, it's a good one, because there is the power of God that they were experienced and around, and the average person may not be ready for it because they didn't go through the same preparation to step into that presence like the high priest did. And so, or even just the lesser priest that would be in the inner court as well. So yeah, it's very interesting that this idea of just, like in my translation, I usually read the Berean Standard Bible. It always just inserts the word ceremonial, which is not there in the original text. It just inserts it. But this is kind of that Christian tradition from the translators, where they think, oh, that was a ceremonial thing just for the Jews, and we're different now. So, and they're like, oh, like they don't make a distinction between, like, okay, that was the power and presence of God. They had to like prepare their hearts and minds and bodies to go step in front of. Yeah. And then you say that fullness of that power is the deposit of the Holy Spirit inside you while you're doing all manner of unclean things in sin. And you're not having the ill effects that Nadab and Abihu had, nor you're not coming down with plague. So like they're not making a distinction about the application of God's Spirit in the power that was required for them to minister with, versus, the leading of the deposit we have as believers. So anyway, I don't want to go on too much of a rant. I just think that there's, again, it's like a conflation of we're not truly studied in the book, in the front of the book well enough. So then we're just taking buzzwords from the law and conflating them into modern dispensational theology.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say, I completely agree, Brother Sean. My time has come and gone. I'm going to have to say goodbye, even though I would like to continue, but I've got a previous promise to one of the kids. So
thank you, Matthew.
I really enjoyed it, brothers.
You're awesome, bro. Thanks for being here.
May the Almighty bless you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, guys.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say this real quick. And Dr. Hamp, I'm glad that you're pushing, you were questioning him, because Sean, to your point, he's coming up with all these weird assertions. Now, Sean, I've said this example to you, Dr. Hamp. I don't think you guys have heard this. I don't know if you guys are familiar. There's a story in the Midrash, Rabbah over here, of when Solomon's writing out his Torah as it's commanded. The story goes that when he gets to the part in Deuteronomy where it says, like, you shall not have many wives, Solomon puts his own interpretation in. Well, God put that there because this is for commoners, but I'm the king. I can afford to have many wives. So he changes the letter Yud to an Aleph. And then the story goes that the letter Yud went up to God and said that, hey, he has changed your Torah, and God said, may it not be, anyone who else changes the Torah will be destroyed, right? Solomon had his own interpretation of what that law meant. And because he changed the Torah to allow himself to have many wives, he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and that took him away from God, right? Instead of, Dr. Hamp, kind of what you were mentioning before, instead of just saying, I might not understand everything, but because God said it, that's a good enough reason for me to follow it. We need to have that mentality instead of kind of like what you were bringing up of, well, he's just kind of making these assumptions and he's trying to give these explanations, but they're not, again, respectfully, they're just not good. Of his reasoning and understanding, it's just not good. And that can be dangerous, just as Solomon was so wise, yet he literally fell, right? His heart turned from God. That can still happen to you, to me, to us, anybody who kind of put their own interpretations, own spin. Well, that's why God did it. Well, I kind of know it, that gets really dangerous.
I just want to make a quick point. Something else he said there, that God never punished the other nations for eating unclean foods, feast days, so on and so forth. In Acts 17, the Apostle Paul says that at one point, God winked at your ignorance, but now, or it's Peter, but God now calls all men everywhere to repent. God never winked at like murder. God never winked at like mistreating children. The stringent things, God never winked at fornication. We see it with the example of when Moabites had to be attacked. God never winked at these things. So what was it that God was winking at that he now no longer winks at? That's everything written of in his commandments. Now he's not going to wink. He's called all men everywhere now into a deeper level of repentance, more than even called nations to before. So when people bring that point up, I always say, yeah, you're right. At a certain point, God may have winked at a pork chop, not keeping the Passover, not keeping the feast days, so on and so forth. But now he calls all men everywhere into the fullness of the truth, to the fullness.
Yeah, he didn't wink at Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And I think it's Job 34:27, only in the Septuagint. It says that God quietly destroys the ungodly, for nations have abandoned his law. So even in Job's sphere, in his culture and his understanding, he knew that the nations were abandoning God's law.
And to be fair, the Hammurabi Code, it has so many of the same things that we have in the Bible. Obviously, not all the same. Clearly, there's certainly not the food laws, and there's not the Sabbath and those kinds of things. But it's already, God's put his commandments in our hearts to some degree. It's called our conscience, and we know that, like, almost everybody knows that murder is kind of bad and stealing's kind of bad. So we already have these basic intrinsic ideas, and but yeah, I think that's a fantastic point that he winked, and he's not winking anymore, and we're supposed to come around to keeping his commandments, and then you go to the new covenant, you're like, dude, the new covenant, right? What's he going to put in our hearts? His Torah. Oh no, well, that's a different Torah. Oh goodness.
You think Sapphira, when she walked up and saw her husband's body being carried out, she said to Peter, but lying to God wasn't one of the four things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
gave me four, Peter. That wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
I forget where it is. I could look it up, but he says to Israel, if something has died naturally, you can't eat it because it wasn't ritually slaughtered. That's my own word, ritual. But
doesn't say ritual though. Yeah.
But he says the sojourner who lives with you can eat it, or the foreigner can eat it. So if God's laws were meant for the entire world, then he would have given them to the entire
law
world.
For the sojourner that lives and dwells among you is the same for the native born.
Well, no, I just gave you one example of where it's not. Sojourners who live with Israel can eat animals that died naturally. Native Israelites cannot. Where is that?
Yeah, I'd love to see that, but we can maybe leave that for another day. But so I would challenge you though that Jesus never changed the definition of food. I think you were.
Yeah, real quick, gentlemen. I would like to point out this comment in the live chat. This is a good comment because it is something that kind of gets overlooked. My wife and I just went through our Sabbath fellowship reading of Jeremiah, and it's fascinating because in some of the proclamations of judgment on the nations outside of Israel stated in Jeremiah, he's judging them for their unrighteousness, and he's scattering them from their lands for their unrighteousness. And to the, I believe it's to the Edomite, not the Edomites, the Ammonites, and to the Egyptians, as he's proclaiming judgment that he's going to scatter them. He says, but in the latter days, I will bring you back and regather you. So it's very interesting, this similar type of covenant language we see with Israel, this promise, because of their sin, they're scattered from their land. But then I would say at the second coming of Christ, that he's going to bring people back into their land. This is why Zechariah 14, it speaks about the Egyptians specifically. If they don't come up for tabernacles from Egypt, they're not going to get any rain, which is a Leviticus 26 judgment of disobeying the Torah. So it's fascinating how it's like, I understand Israel was supposed to be a light. They were supposed to learn it, know it, and be a light to the other nations. But the other nations were held accountable for not doing God's ways. And we see that throughout the law and the prophets. And it's just, it makes you wonder, like I can't remember exactly what chapter it was in Jeremiah where, chapter 1 says, I'll make you a prophet to the nations. But then it sees another king. I think it was the king of Sidon, or maybe it was the king of Egypt. Either way, they're responding to something that Jeremiah had written them. Like, so Jeremiah is speaking the words of Yahweh, not just to the rebellious kings of Judah, but also to other leaders of nations around him. And it's, for example, Nabuzaradan, and like it's like in Jeremiah chapter 48 or 49, as Babylon actually invades, the captain of Nebuchadnezzar's army, he comes in and he protects Jeremiah and says, "We know that your God is judging you for abandoning his ways."
Yeah.
But we're told to protect you, Jeremiah, right? And so, like, how did he know that? Who told him that? Was it Daniel?
Right.
Like, how did he know that? Like, there's so much interesting interconnectedness, if you will, with how Israel was having an influence on people around them.
Yeah.
And just like with Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5, some of them responded. Just like the Assyrians in Jonah's day, some of them responded.
They probably knew it from Ezekiel. I mean, Ezekiel's over there in Babylon, and he's having all these weird gymnastic things he's got to do. You know, sit on your side for all these days on your right side, and then on your left side, and take your hair and burn it. And you know, I mean, he was doing this in the public squares, and you know, word probably got around, and they're like, "What the heck is that guy doing?" Like, oh, he's foretelling the destruction of Babylon. So that's a great point, Sean. I really appreciate that, because I'd never made that connection. That's really cool. They knew, like, we heard that this is happening because you guys really screwed up, right? And
you abandoned your God.
Jeremiah.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. In the same way, Abraham is told that the sin of the Amorites will be full at a certain time. Right, and then later tells the Israelites, "I'm going to kick them out," like he says in Leviticus 18:20, because they did these abominations, of which the dietary is a part of those abominations. You know, and just like in Ezekiel 20, he tells Israel, he calls them wicked for profaning his Sabbaths. That's in the list of other things they did, but it is in there. It is one of the things he mentioned. So it's funny to me, because they're like, "Oh, well, you know, it's just the Sabbath day. It's not really like a big moral thing." You know, it was more of because I hear this argument all the time. It wasn't a part of the moral law. It was the ceremonial law. And I'm like, Yahweh thought it was immoral and called them wicked for profaning it, and scattered them, and listed that as one of the many reasons he scattered them. So he thought it was very immoral to not do the Sabbath. Yeah. Something to consider for anyone listening.
How immoral is one of the few cases we actually see of God ordering the death penalty personally to
that's right.
He carried out. That's how immoral he thought it was, that he told him to throw them rocks.
You were alluding to Mark chapter 7, where they were talking about whether you should eat without washing your hands first. And obviously the Pharisees were trying to get Jesus, right? They were trying to trip him up. They kept trying to find some fault in him.
Right.
So do you think it's logical or reasonable that Jesus would be like, "Oh yeah, you can have pork now. Pork is totally legit," and change the definition of food?
Well, he didn't change the definition of food. I agree with you there. Yeah. He didn't change the definition of food, but food has not been defined in the Bible only as things you're allowed to eat. All things are called food.
Yes, it has. I mean, Leviticus 11 says these are what you can eat, ochel. Lechol, these are ochel, and these you can't ochel. Okay, you know, you can't lechol these.
Right. So he's not defining food. He's saying what you can and can't eat.
Yeah, the word for eat and the word for food are the same exact word, right? Lechol means to eat, and ochel is food. Same root. All right. So he's telling us 100% what is food and what isn't food.
I disagree with that, because if I could use your same terminology, you're using the English understanding of the word food.
Okay, this one really got me, Dr. Hamp. When I was listening to this, I was like, I about pulled my hair out. I was like, because I thought you did good bringing to his attention that, hey, this word common or ceremonial, this is not in the actual text. This is like a translator's decision later, and it throws us off. But the word food and its definition is in the Hebrew and the Greek, and it is explicitly stated. And so, no, Dr. Solberg, you're not using his logic. You're conflating the word. It's like it's kind of like an apologetic debate tactic more than it is truly trying to parrot your logic on this. Because it just kind of got under my skin a little bit. You know, I was like, that's not good faith in my opinion. It's weird.
No. I mean, this is silly. Like we don't know what food is. I mean, come on. This is silly.
Using the Hebrew.
No, you didn't say oh hell. You said food.
Well,
So how do you? So,
lechol is to eat, and ochel is food.
so you've got the
Same
word.
root, right? Aleph Kaf Lamed. Aleph
Right.
Kaf Lamed, same root.
So, like for example, Leviticus 11:34 shows one way that clean food can become unclean food. Right? Any food in it that could be eaten, on which water comes, shall be unclean. So this was food. Now, does it suddenly not become food when water lands on it? Right? And Hosea 9:3 says, "They shall eat unclean food in Assyria."
Yeah, because they're not my people anymore, right?
But they're eating food.
But
Some food's clean,
Well-
some food's unclean. It's not a question of the definition of what food is. It's what clean and unclean are. That's what I'm saying.
It also says when he's scattering them that they're going to go into these other nations and worship their gods of wood, stone, and silver, not because God is endorsing that, but because it's the result of their rebellion. They're going to go into servitude and exile the nations, since they were already worshiping idols in Israel, trying to be like the nations. He's going to give them what they want, and they're still going to go into a less free condition while still serving the gods of those nations. Not that God is changing the definition of idolatry suddenly.
And can I point something out? I just checked here.
Go
And
ahead,
I
bro.
also, in the Hosea chapter 9 that he brought up, in Hebrew it never says food. It says
That's
they'll eat
right.
unclean.
That's
No food
right.
is- This is they'll
That's
eat
right.
unclean.
That's right. Yes. I was just going to say that it doesn't say they're going to eat food. It just says they're going to eat unclean.
So he kind of proves your point because Hosea just called it food. It's unclean. It's not food because it's unclean. That's pretty cool. I like that. I'm going to use that.
By the way, Dr. Hamp, if you're not aware, our brother Oblast Ned, he's like every day he's online doing apologetics for the Torah. The Christians should obey the law of God. He does like a 4 or 5 hour show every day and has the craziest people calling in. So like he's out there in them internet streets on the daily, dealing with all these arguments.
Nice.
You know, like how would you describe Hosea 9:3? They shall eat unclean food. You know what I mean? How would you define that understanding of what food is there?
It says that they will eat unclean. So the word food is added to the text.
Well, it's the subject of the sentence though in context. So it's not.
Well, food is not actually in the text. It says that they will eat unclean.
Right. Well, you don't need every word in a sentence to understand what the subject of the sentence is.
Fair enough. But the point is that food wasn't redefined.
Well, how is food defined in Scripture?
Yeah, the Aramaic and the Greek says unclean things. It doesn't say food
Right.
in that passage.
Well,
you described what you can eat and what you can't eat, but you didn't describe what food is.
Well, into the context of animals, God says in Leviticus 11 that these animals, such as sheep and cattle, etc., those are animals that may be eaten because they may be le'echol, right, to eat, which is the word for ochel, which is food. And these are the animals that may not be eaten.
Sure.
So right there, he's telling us. Now, look.
Telling who, though? He's only telling Israel, not the whole world.
That's true. Yeah.
Genesis 9:3, he tells Noah he can eat every living thing will be food for him.
Yeah.
What about humans?
Without qualification.
Yeah.
Without qualification.
Yeah.
So watch out, Shem, Japheth, Ham. Better run.
It's always my favorite question.
Noah's hungry.
I've actually had someone tell me yes. I've had most people tell me yes. That's crazy.
Really?
Oh,
you can eat humans?
Yeah.
Oh, that's disgusting.
If I have a taste for it. Yeah, you're crazy.
They
But
are.
see, if you were to ask Solberg that question, he would say, "Well, of course we can't eat humans."
Where's
And
this
then but then it's weird because it's like I'm defending the idea for us to eat humans, which is weird, right? But there's no scripture that says like not to eat humans.
Right.
So,
Now here's the deep little cut there, right? When they offered their children to Molech, typically with that ritual, the sacrifice of the victim, was very similar to an animal victim in the sense that they would cook the child and then proceed to cannibalize. And this is horrific, right? And this is why we're told not to eat human blood or blood at all, right? Because this was historically one of the ways of idol worship, and it's still done today. They call it spirit cooking today in Hollywood. And so this is where it's like historically documented now. But yes, you're right, Will. There's no explicit verse in the Torah that says you shall not eat a bipedal human, one that walks on two paws, or one that walks on two legs. Like, it doesn't say that anywhere. And again, this becomes one of those issues where the Bible doesn't say a lot of things, right? And this is why it's important for us to actually study, like Jesus said in Matthew 4:4, that we live on every word of the mouth of God, right? Not just some of it and then make it and fill in the rest with some Play-Doh. Like, we have to really study and be approved to know all of it, so that we can it becomes a coherent story instead of something that's jumbled up and contradictory at every step.
Yeah.
That's a good point. In First Timothy 4 too, people bring it up, right? They bring up that every creature of God is good. Yeah, humans are good. That doesn't mean humans could be consumed, because they were not created to be received with thanksgiving. But they are good. Humans, God said humans are good.
Yeah, and Oblige, Dr. Hamp, in his second discussion with Dr. Solberg, they do go heavy into 1 Timothy 4 and the more common rebuttals that you hear.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So here's
though he did say to take clean and unclean animals onto the ark, right? He already said what.
Well, clean and unclean, yeah, but we see from the context that was for what's clean and unclean to sacrifice, and that was pre-Sinai. So we're not sure what standards we're talking about with Noah, because everybody sacrificed back then, and every society had an understanding of what they called clean and unclean. So we can't retroactively, I don't believe we can anachronistically apply the laws of Sinai centuries earlier to what Noah was doing,
But then that would have invoked change. And God doesn't change.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he doesn't change. Exactly. And that's the thing, is like, if you understand the principles of God, the principles don't change. Maybe I didn't tell my kids not to murder when they were 5 years old, because they didn't need to know it at that point, right? But I was still against murder back then, even though I didn't explicitly say don't murder, right? And that's how stupid it is. Just because I didn't explicitly tell them when they're 2, 3, and 4 not to do something didn't mean I didn't have that principle. And that's the thing that so many Christians don't understand about the Torah, is these are God's principles. They're his principles for living. They're his instructions, and he's making them, he's verbalizing them. He writes them on the wall. Don't steal your brother's toys, okay? Like, play nicely. But if I didn't have to write it, I wouldn't write it on the wall. I wish you guys would just play nicely together, but you don't. So I'm going to write it down. And then you ignored what I wrote on the ground. So now I'm going to come and play with you, and I'm going to show you what it looks like to actually play nicely with your brother. That's what Jesus did, and so Jesus came and did it. But it was always in his heart that we would play nicely with each other. It was always in his heart that we would eat animals that are nutritious for us and avoid animals that are poisonous for us. It's not complicated. That's the thing. But because the church at large has been poisoned, whether it's, I blame mostly Marcion for this stuff, but maybe there's some other factors. But this is the underlying blindness that they have, and they just can't get those glasses off. And until they do, they're going to keep arguing that wasn't for us, that was for the Jews, and has no application to us.
It's going to be an awkward conversation when Christ returns and the law starts going forth from Zion to all nations. In Isaiah 56, 6 and 7, all nations come to his house of prayer with their burnt offerings and sacrifices, and one of them brings a pig. It's going to be an awkward conversation at the gates with the angels who guard the gates. They'll be like, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute here.
Well, and this is why in our second discussion, we got heavily into our identity, and we talked about who we are, because that really is where this conversation has to go. As long as Christians think that, well, that's for the Jews, it's not for me, then they're gonna have this little escape that they can just get out of it because it doesn't apply to me. Most of the Bible doesn't apply to me. But once you understand that this whole story from Genesis 12 to Revelation 22 is about Israel, not the church. It's about Israel. And Israel and God got married at Mount Sinai. That's what the old covenant is all about. That's what it meant, right? He says, behold, the days are coming. I'll make a new covenant with the house of Judah and the house of Israel, not according to the covenant made with their fathers when I took them out of Egypt by the hand, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, right? That was the old covenant. That's the husband thing. He was a husband to Israel. And then they got divorced because after the kingdom split, the northern 10 tribes were going after all these other gods. And God finally said in Jeremiah 3:8, okay, here you go. Your certificate of divorce. Adios. You're not my people anymore. I'm not your God. You're not my wife. I'm not your husband. You are a non-entity. You're a non-entity. You don't exist anymore. Individually, yes. Corporately, no. Gone. And then God says, but I'm going to bring you back one day. And that's the major thesis of Romans. That's the major thesis of Ephesians, to some degree Galatians, to some degree Colossians. And when all these Bible difficulties that we have from Paul are only difficult if we don't understand the divorce or the marriage, divorce, and the remarriage. And, Paul is saying the handwriting that was against us. Well, what's he talking about? The law, the Torah? No, he's talking about the divorce certificate that said, sorry, Israel, that was swallowed up by the Gentiles. You can't come back because you did all this stuff and now the law is against you. This divorce certificate says you can never return. And once you see it, once you see that, oh my goodness, the cross of Christ, it took care of the law of the husband. Romans chapter 7, the law of the husband has been annulled. It's been, crucified. And now we died with it. And now we rise with Christ. And now there's this new husband, Christ, who is post-resurrection. And now we're now betrothed to him in the new covenant. It becomes so incredibly simple, and yet they can't see it. And so in the second debate, he said, oh yeah, we're now part of the Commonwealth of Israel. And I'm like, okay, did you just say that we're part of the Commonwealth of Israel? Yes. I'm like, do you understand? He's like, but that doesn't mean I have to keep the law of Moses. I'm like, oh, here we go again. Here we go.
Yeah, I think in the Old Testament, the only people who didn't keep the law who were within the Commonwealth were the military combatants who were in servitude as water carriers, who were enemies of Israel, who were in forced servitude.
Gibeonites, right? Yeah, they were
conscripted,
Yeah, they struck a deal, right? The Gibeonites. Yeah, exactly.
And it's like they were not trying to be in walking in fellowship with Yahweh. And so they ended up being servants, and it wasn't a good situation for them. So yeah, the Commonwealth Association means you have to do the laws of the land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. The Sabbath, he was very much living within the spirit of the Sabbath. He says, hey, Sabbath wasn't, you're not made for it. It was made for you. Right. And yet the Pharisees had put all these little restrictions and rules and extra things all around it, and people could barely move. Right. And it was taking all the fun out of it.
Yeah. They built the fence around the Torah, they called it.
Yeah, exactly. Until, your fence is like 1 foot by 1 foot and you're just standing there like, I can barely move, right?
Well, pretty soon they're almost worshiping the fence,
Yeah.
Rather than God. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there were so many examples of this, of where, God had to kind of shake up the disciples. One of my favorite is in Acts 10, where, of course, Peter has the dream, the sheet comes down with all the unclean animals, and he says, right, Peter, kill and eat. And he says, no, Lord, I can't do that. Right. And so then he wakes up, there's a knock at the door. There's 3 dudes. Okay. So the sheet came down 3 times. There's 3 guys.
Hold on, Sean.
And so he's thinking about this. What is this?
We already heard this.
Oh, my bad, guys. I don't know what happened. It got bumped.
I'm listening. I'm like, deja vu is going on right here.
Sorry. Here. Yeah, because we're almost done with it. So here we go.
Does it suddenly not become food when water lands on it? Right. And Hosea 9:3 says, they shall eat unclean food in Assyria.
Animals.
Here we go.
God says in Leviticus 11 that these animals, such as sheep and cattle, etc., those are animals that may be eaten because they may be le'echol, right, to eat, which is the word for ochel, which is food. And these are the animals that may not be eaten.
Sure.
So right there, he's telling us. Now, look.
Telling who, though? He's only telling Israel, not the whole world.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
In Genesis 9:3, he tells Noah he can eat every.
Okay. What about the mixed multitude?
Yeah.
What about what was it? Leviticus, is it 26? Leviticus 24 or 26? You got the Egyptian father whose son is wilding out and he has to be dealt with, right? Because he came in with them. Like, Caleb's a Kenite.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
World beater of this situation.
there's a mixed multitude here, right? And Moses invited his father, who was a Midianite, or his father-in-law, who's a Midianite, to stay with them permanently, right? I don't think he did, but he invited him to, right? So that was before Mount Sinai. That means he would have been there when Mount Sinai happened. You know what I'm saying? So, like, Moses didn't qualify his invite to Jethro by saying, "Oh, by the way, if you stay with us, though, God's going to give us some laws, and they won't apply to you." And so, no, his father-in-law was a high priest of Midian who does a burnt offering with Moses in Exodus 18. And you're like, okay, so nobody's saying, "Hey, wait, you're not a Levite. Why are you doing a burnt offering with the Levites? Like, what's going on here?" No, there's a lot more to the story that I think we should unpack, but I'll leave that for another show.
And Sean too, like God says it many times that there's to be one law between you and the sojourner among you. All right. So if there's one law between Israel and the sojourner, it doesn't matter if he's saying, "Hey, Israel, do X, Y, and Z," because he's already stated that there's one law. Like, throughout this entire conversation, there's too many verbatim fallacies where, like, Solberg is looking directly in the text, unless it says, Israel and the sojourner. Oh, then it applies, but then it's going to be different. No, it says many times, maybe 15 times in the Torah, 12 or 15 times in the Torah. There's to be like one law for you and the sojourner who is among you. And a few different times they'll say like Israel and the sojourner among you and the women and children. Like it'll be a little more specific, but there's one law for everyone. Okay. Yeah. So even if it says like you, Israel, you do X, Y, and Z, if there's one law, it's going to apply. Like, I hate saying common sense, but
right.
And that's going to come up here in just a minute because he's going to mention Deuteronomy 14:21. And okay. I'm excited to get you guys' take when we get there. We're almost done.
Living thing will be food for him.
Yeah.
Without qualification.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So, so here's
though he did say to take clean and unclean animals onto the ark, right? He already said what?
Well, clean and unclean, yeah, but we see from the context that was for what's clean and unclean to sacrifice, and that was pre-Sinai. So we're not sure what standards we're talking about with Noah, because everybody sacrificed back then, and
Sorry, guys, and there you have it. We're not. If we put God's law just within the Sinai covenant, you don't, before and after, what standards do you actually have? There to me is and it's okay if no one else agrees, but that to me is the hugest inconsistency in this interpretation, is to say that God's law only came at Sinai and then was only for the Jews and then went away when Christ resurrected or went to the cross, either one. Sometimes even they'll say, oh, it was after the temple was destroyed in AD 70. That's when the law officially went away. But however it's delineated, but they say that dispensation of time, the law was only for the Jews at that time. And therefore, then you're like, okay, well then now how do we determine the standard by which we walk with Christ and do holiness and like actually live? And I've heard, oh, it's the law of Christ. And then I say, okay, show me where the list is. What's this law of Christ? Where's the list? Because what it turns into in practicality is each pastor at each church has their own set of oral Torah. That's what it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my observation in life after going to church all my life.
Said every society had an understanding of what they called clean and unclean. Mm-hmm. So we can't retroactively, I don't believe we can anachronistically apply the laws of Sinai centuries earlier to what Noah was doing,
Did you guys do that?
The Sabbath, he was very much living.
Sorry, I didn't.
But
Well, clean and unclean, yeah, but we see from the context that was for what's clean and unclean to sacrifice, and that was pre-Sinai. So we're not sure what standards we're talking about with Noah, because everybody sacrificed back then, and everybody, every society had an understanding of what they called clean and unclean. So we can't retroactively, I don't believe we can anachronistically apply the laws of Sinai centuries earlier to what Noah was doing, you know?
Guys, I don't know why it keeps stopping. I think maybe there's a glitch or something, but what do you guys think about that? Well, I guess we can just end this clip right here. What do you guys think about that? Can we, is it bad logic? Is it bad theological reasoning? Is it bad exegesis to look at all the laws given to Mount Sinai and say, oh, well, there's no way we can determine what they were doing before then? What do you guys think?
I think it's just it's such a bad argument, you know, for the fact that something is clean or unclean, right? Like I will literally ask my wife, you know, when I'm looking at the dishwasher, I'm like, hey, are these dishes clean or unclean? Because if they're clean, I'm going to put them away so that we can eat off them. If they're unclean, I'm going to leave them in the dishwasher. That tells me that we're still loading it, right? But again, it's like Dr. Solberg here is looking for this like verse, and Dr. Hamp is asking you like, hey, show me this verse where they did not eat the clean or unclean, right? It's too much of an argument from silence. But the distinction of for it to be clean and unclean already there, I hate saying common sense, but obviously there's a distinction there. And Solberg keeps pushing you on the, hey, he says, you know, every living thing is for you. And, you know, Sean, I know you're joking about like Japheth and Ham and everyone, but like, okay, like obviously Solberg would say, no, you can't eat the humans. Okay, but why? God said, you know, hey, eat everything that moves, right? There's no distinction, right? So clearly there's something more there, right? You know, that's why like I enjoy reading like the Septuagint and like the Samaritan Pentateuch, you know, because like there's more clarification, I feel like, regarding the Torah than just the Masoretic text. Like it's cool kind of reading these things like that. But there's obviously something more there, right? And I think what Solberg is really kind of arguing with you, Dr. Hamp, is show me the verse where it verbatim says what you're arguing. And if you can't show me that, that means it's not true.
Right. Yeah.
It's bad arguing. And Sean, you mentioned it earlier. It's almost like that debate tactic. Yeah. And you know, I feel bad because Dr. Hamp, I can tell like you're not here for a debate. You're not here for opening statements, rebuttals, cross-examination. I have 15 minutes. You just want to have a genuine conversation. And he's treating this very disingenuously. It seems like.
Yeah. It's like, how do we know what in Genesis 26:5 when it's about Abraham, you know, who kept the charge, the commandments, the statutes, and laws? What were those? How do we know what those were? You know, why is he being commended to Isaac to do this? That your father did this faithfully to me, and he's praising Abraham for it. But yet, okay, what does that mean? Like, so clearly, they're like, who told Cain and Abel to bring sacrifices? What's going on there?
Right.
Like, clearly, there's some information that we haven't been given. Why does Cain say, "Whomever will find me will kill me"? Isn't that the blood avenger law?
Right.
Why would he say that? How would he even know that?
There's lots of stuff the Bible just doesn't spell out every detail. Yeah. It would be, you know, 30 times bigger if it spelled out every detail. And, you know, sometimes I wish it did, but sometimes I'm glad it doesn't. You know, but I think God gave us a brain, you know, and just like we figured out that certain fish and bottom eaters are not good for us, God's like, look, just don't eat this one. Well, someday you'll understand why. Okay, that's cool. You know, and okay, keep the Sabbath, and one day you'll understand why. You know, and now we know that if we don't take a day off and we don't give ourselves that time to rest and to recreate, well, it leads to all kinds of disease and sickness, and it leads to going postal and all kinds of stuff. You know, and there's all kinds of societal ills because we simply don't follow what God has told us to do. And concerning his whole thing of, well, does the sojourner doesn't have to do it. There's a couple different words that are used in scripture. So one is ger, that's someone who generally lives among you. One is a toshav, that seems to be some kind of a more temporary dweller. And so we have the similar designations here in America, and I know our system's not perfect, but it is what it is. So we have a native born full resident or a full citizen, okay, and then you have someone who moves here and becomes a citizen. That would be like a ger, okay. They have all the rights as everybody else, but they weren't born here, so they can't be president, okay. And then you have someone who's a green card holder. Well, they have a lot of rights, but they don't have all the rights. And then you have somebody who's on a very temporary visa, like they're as a tourist, right? They're afforded certain benefits of being here as a tourist, but they don't have to pay taxes here because they don't live here, even though they're staying at the Marriott for 3 months. Okay, but you don't have to pay taxes because you're not a citizen of this country, and so that's what we're getting at, is that everyone who is here as either a native born or a permanent resident or a green card holder, there are laws that you have to do. If you're here on a tourist visa, you still got to stop at the red lights, but otherwise you don't have to pay taxes. And there's a few other things that you're not responsible to do because this isn't your country. And that's what God is getting at. If somebody's just passing through, like, hey, I'm just, and they would pass through at a lot slower pace than what we do today, right? Nobody came on a tourist visa, but like, hey, I'm just passing through. I'm headed up to Mesopotamia, but this is the way to get there. And, I can only take my flocks and herds whenever so fast, right? And so it's going to take me 3 months to get through your country. Okay. They don't have to do certain things. They don't, if they want to eat their pigs, I guess they can do that, but they got to keep on moving, right? They can't set their tent here and start putting up shop and now this is suddenly their home. That's not how it works. But again, this common logic is thrown out the window and nobody's like, oh, I understand it.
Yeah, I think we even see some of that aspect in Moses during the journeys in the wilderness in the early years when he went and when he had to fight Og, right? He was like, well, we won't drink any water. We won't take anything from your land. We'll just pass through. And Og's response was, I brought my army out to kill all of you. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a good natured, friendly response, And so he had to fight and defeat Og and Sihon. But it's just that kind of concept of like, hey, they understood if I'm going to pass through your land, I'm not a permanent resident, but there are some respect I need to give you. And I think that in the same way we see that within Yahweh's law, like, okay, there's people that, what's your intent? Are you there to actually graft in? Okay, well, here's the laws of the God of this land, right? Yeah. You have to do them, and I think you see that even in Ezekiel 47. Let me see if I don't want to butcher this. I'm going to try to read it. You see it in Ezekiel 47 at the very last chapter, very last verse. It says, you're to divide this land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. You shall allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the foreigner who dwells among you who has children. You are to treat them as a native-born Israelite along with you. They shall be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. And whatever tribe that foreigner dwells, you are to assign his inheritance there, declares Yahweh. And I think that's, although it's explicitly stated in Ezekiel's writings, I think we see that with Caleb receiving Hebron. I think that's what we're seeing when they give him a portion. They give him a whole city, actually, in the tribe of Judah, Hebron, and he's just counted amongst those of Judah at that point in that tribe. And even though he's technically a Kenite and not truly blood-born from amongst them, so I think it's an interesting concept that Yahweh already has provisions in his law for like, okay, it's going to be, there's a foreigner here. His intent is to graft in. Same laws apply.
Right. And even just to point out that what the foreigner is allowed to eat is just a clean animal that died of itself.
That's right. Yeah.
Not even like God said, go sell him a pig or sell him some catfish. It is, your cow died. Okay, there's a guy who's kind of around. He can eat that cow. That's fine. Right? Not that go find a pig for this guy to eat while he's in Israel. Something that's just abominable to God. Mainly, put it in perspective too, that guy, he's not going to be going to approach the temple to offering sacrifices. Him being unclean is This relatively means nothing because he's not going to offer any sacrifices. He's not going to the temple. He's not, he doesn't serve the God of Israel in that sense. He serves because he's there and he has to follow the rules, but he's not going to go offer a sacrifice tomorrow for a sin. So his uncleanliness means what exactly? Nothing really.
Yeah, it only means something if you start to interact or he wants to interact with you, but ultimately, it's there's different implications altogether. You're right. And also Deuteronomy 14:21, obviously being Deuteronomy, being Yahweh's Moses' words to the people to at the end of the 40 years. So that means they've already been taught Leviticus 11. So they're not being taught new information in Deuteronomy 14:21. They already know what the definition of food is. And so an Israelite who may sell a carcass of a dead animal to the foreigner, he's not selling an unclean carcass. They're not selling, because that would have been food that they're going to eat, right? They're not, again, like I said, they're not selling them an unclean animal to eat because they already had a definition for food.
Yeah. And, we never see, this is more anecdotal, but we never see Abraham slaughtering a pig, right? There's zero mention. Of course, it doesn't say anything about chickens either, right? But we clearly have sheep. There's lots of sheep, and there are cattle. So those are the two animals that we see a lot in the Bible. But we never hear about pigs, except when some demons decided to go hang out in some pigs. But otherwise, there's no positive mention of anybody, any Israelite who was ever raising pigs. It's just not done.
Yeah, and isn't it also in Isaiah 65, right?
Well, 66, I think, talks about how they're going to, be slaughtering, or they're going to be
eating the mice and the swine.
Yeah, the mice and the swine, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. It's 65:4, sitting among the graves, spending nights in secret places. He's talking to idol worshippers, eating the meat of pigs and polluted broth from their bowls.
Right.
They say, don't come near me, for I'm holier than you. But yeah, then he says he's going to judge them later. So it's an interesting concept of how, a lot of people would put Isaiah 65 and 66 in the eschatology of Christ's return, and how these people are found eating unclean foods and being idol worshipers, and being judged by Christ at the return in the power of the Father. So it's an interesting thought. Obviously, in Revelation, we see that these people in chapter 16, even after these extreme plagues hit, like the big hail, the people in the boils, the people curse God and refuse to give up their idols. So there's still going to be people just extremely rebellious, even staring Christ in the face at his second coming, who will have to be judged accordingly. But I just pray that everyone listening to us tonight takes the things we said to heart, studies the words we've talked about, mentioned, or put on screen for you with the scriptures, so that you can have a closer walk with Christ. And I don't have any other videos that I think we have time to review. I think it's almost 3 hours, so I want to be respectful of you guys. Dr. Hamp, is there any parting words you'd like to say for tonight?
Yeah, I just want to encourage people that God's ways are good. And once we can truly believe that, and so for our Sunday Christian pork eating brothers, don't be thinking that God just gave some random laws. I think that is the craziest thing that Solberg said, is that these are just random laws. No, God is really good. He really loves you. And he was trying to warn us to stay away from certain foods, non-food, right? Certain animals, certain activities that are not healthy for us, certain thought patterns and behaviors. And I want to say for our Torah, Hebrew roots kind of brothers, don't think that we're getting extra credit because we're doing these things and now we're keeping Torah. It's always been about love. And if we're doing these things, great. You're enjoying the benefits thereof. And, God loves us. Like, that's the thing. And we're doing these things for our benefit. He gave these instructions, commandments, ordinances to us for our benefit. It really is that simple.
Amen.
Guys, brothers, anything you want to say before we go?
I concur, man. Fear God, keep his commandments. If you love Christ, obey him, live like him. Simple
Amen.
life.
That's right.
Amen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite verse, but one that like I think about all the time is Ecclesiastes 12:13. Like this is Solomon, like the wisest guy ever. And at the end of his life, he's like, "Hey guys, just fear God and keep his commandments."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like for him to put that, I mean, he's seen it all. He's had the highs, he's had the lows. And this was his conclusion on his deathbed. And I think we should really think about that. And Dr. Hamp, you already brought it up, and I agree with you. I think that was insane to say that, like, oh, they're just random. No, God, God is not just a God, he's a father. He's a father who loves us. We are his children. Just as any parent out there, you're going to tell your child not to do certain things, to stay away from certain things, not because you're bored and you're just like, because they're like, no, there's a method to the madness. There's a reason behind these laws and the commands. Even if you might not fully understand it, right? It's, I think everyone, whether you're pronomian or antinomian, I think you would come to a logical conclusion that you can't obviously understand God in every way or fashion. There's going to be some things that you don't fully understand. There's going to be some things of just focusing on the 66 book canon. You're not going to understand every single verse from the 66 book canon, right? But God is good. God loves you, right? Just listen to him. It's not that hard. It's like mind blowing to me about how people just fight God. I don't get it, and maybe God will soften their heart. But yeah, I don't know. It's for our benefit, as Brother Matthew Jansen before he left, as he brought up. It's for our benefit. It's wild to me.
Yeah.
But thank you, actually, Dr. Hamp, for having this discussion with him. I couldn't have done it. I don't know. I would probably come off mean having these conversations and a lot of these silly answers that were behind it. But thank you for enduring during those conversations. And Sean, thanks for hosting this, bring all this light. And Brother Blias, man, good seeing you again, dude. Thanks for all your comments. I love learning from you guys, being with you guys. This is a lot of fun, and everyone watching, I hope this has been beneficial.
If people want to dig deeper, God's divorce is a really easy way to get into this topic. It's not polemic. It's great. Some people are giving them away, they're buying 10, 20 at a time because they're just giving away people, and the response has been amazing. So I'm very encouraged by that. So check that out, God's Divorce. I think you're going to love it.
So what is historically random? And you guys, I don't know if y'all have watched any of my 42 series where I did a whole historical breakdown on the maze, the labyrinth of ancient Greece, and how the chimera and the tribute that they would put young boys and girls into the labyrinth to be chased by the big demon animal and be killed by them. The labyrinth would change, like it was supposedly created by this master engineer, and that the walls of the labyrinth would change so that they, even if they thought they figured out the maze, it would change on them. And so nobody escaped the labyrinth, and it was considered basically sacrificing young boys and girls to Zeus. And that's where that's what this reminds me of. Is like Yahweh's just sitting up there being like, all right, I've made everything, it's orderly, it's all good. How about I just make it a little bit more difficult right now? I'm gonna change some things up, make it a little bit more difficult. Instead of him just having a solid standard where he says, like, unlike the labyrinth, do not turn to the right or the left. I will make your path straight. Right. And that's where it's fascinating to me. Like, God is so blatantly consistent with what he's said. And it's just, we just overcomplicate it way too much.
Yeah. So,
and we just, for some reason, it's like we get bored and we want to overcomplicate it for our amusement or something,
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you guys for being here. Y'all are a blessing.
Thank you.
And we're going to end the stream tonight. Everybody like, share, and subscribe. Go check out their channels. And we will see you guys next time.
God bless.
God bless.